The night was unusually still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. In the heart of a dense forest, far from the eyes of ordinary men, a circle of ancient stones glowed under the flickering light of a single eternal flame. Smoke twisted lazily toward the star-strewn sky, carrying with it a scent both familiar and unsettling. Smoke, resin, and the faint metallic tang of ritual. Around the fire, figures moved silently, cloaked in shadows, their faces hidden beneath hoods embroidered with symbols that had not been spoken aloud for centuries. The air was thick with anticipation. Every movement, every glance, seemed to echo a promise older than empires, the promise that this fire held secrets powerful enough to shape the fate of kings, cities, and entire civilizations. Fire has always been more than a simple tool. It was the first spark of human mastery over nature, the first companion in the long, dark nights of prehistory. Early humans huddled around it for warmth, protection, and sustenance, but it was also a mirror of something deeper, a reflection of the unknown. The glow of flames stirred something primal, awe, fear, fascination. It promised survival, yet demanded respect, and for those who dared to worship it, obedience. Across continents and millennia, fire became a language. Its flicker whispered secrets, its roar announced power, and its extinguishing could mean death. Long before empires rose and fell, before the first cities pierced the horizon with stone and mortar, certain humans began to recognize something extraordinary. Fire was not merely a force of nature. It was a conduit to influence, to persuasion, to dominion. From Mesopotamia's sun-baked plains to the shadowed valleys of Anatolia, groups of devoted men and women gathered around sacred flames, interpreting their flickers and sparks as messages from gods unseen. These early fire cults did not merely revere flame. They understood it. They understood that the mastery of fire could command attention, loyalty, and fear. A flickering torch in the hands of the right priest could shape the destiny of kings, sway the outcome of battles, and silence rivals. By night, the rituals unfolded like a slow, hypnotic dance. Flames leapt and shivered over pyres of wood and offerings. Incense curled in delicate spirals, hiding secrets from those who were not meant to witness. The chants were low and resonant, a melody of reverence and intimidation, designed to stir both devotion and dread. Every observer, whether noble or peasant, felt a subtle yet undeniable pull toward the fire's authority. The flame was both a promise and a threat. Its warmth comforted, yet its shadow warned. And the priests, the silent guardians of the sacred spark, wielded this duality like a finely honed blade. It was a dangerous knowledge. Many who sought to control the flame found themselves undone by it. The fire demanded ritual, devotion, and secrecy. A misstep, an uninvited witness, a whispered betrayal. Any could extinguish the flame and destroy the balance of power painstakingly cultivated over generations. And yet, those who succeeded in mastering it became invisible monarchs of influence. They were the unseen architects of empires, shaping destinies from behind the veil of smoke and light. In a time when armies and wealth defined supremacy, these guardians reminded the world that some power was subtler, more enduring, and infinitely more dangerous. Legends whispered of fires that never died, of sparks that carried divine messages, and of pyres that could judge the guilty. Across the world, from temples carved into cliffs to hidden chambers beneath palaces, the eternal flame became a symbol of continuity, authority, and enigma. Its light illuminated only what its keepers allowed, and history, shaped by the unseen hands of those who understood fire, often bore the imprint of this secret influence. Tonight, as the smoke spiraled into the dark sky, the question lingered in every heart present. How could something as simple as a flame command such devotion, such fear, and such loyalty? Was it the mystery that drew them, or the promise of power it contained? Perhaps it was both, intertwined in a delicate balance that had endured through centuries, surviving the rise and fall of kings, the march of armies, and the relentless passage of time. As the observers whispered to one another in hallowed tones, there was a moment when the flame itself seemed to flicker knowingly, almost as if it understood the enormity of its purpose. It was more than fire. It was a signal, a warning, and a promise. It held the memory of the past and the authority to shape the future. To those who dared study it, to those brave enough or foolish enough to follow its light, the eternal flame was more than an object of worship. It was a key to influence, to understanding, and perhaps to the most profound secrets of human ambition and survival. And yet, as history would prove again and again, fire was a fickle master. Those who commanded it could fall victim to it in an instant. And in this delicate balance between reverence and obsession, the eternal question remained: what would happen to those who sought to harness the flame, and what price had already been paid by those who had come before? For in the world of fire cults, the spark was never just light. It was destiny, mystery, and power, all entwined in a living, breathing, flickering enigma that could illuminate the path of an empire or consume it entirely. Long before the grand temples and secretive cults, before kings and emperors understood the subtle power of fire, there was simply survival. Early humans huddled in caves, shivering against the biting cold of night, their eyes wide with awe as sparks danced from freshly struck stones. Fire was the first companion of humanity, a flickering shield against the vast darkness, a source of warmth and life in a world full of unknown dangers. Yet even in those earliest encounters, fire held something more than utility. It inspired wonder and, quietly, fear. For as much as it nurtured, it also destroyed. A careless spark could consume all they had, leaving nothing but charred remains. And in that fragile balance between creation and destruction, humans began to sense the first whispers of a deeper truth, that fire was not merely an object, but a force with its own will, one that demanded respect and obedience. Around these primordial flames, stories began to take shape. Tales passed from one generation to the next spoke of the fire as a gift from unseen beings, a token of power from forces far greater than mankind. It was said that fire had chosen humanity, but only those who understood it could truly wield its power. Early tribes observed its behavior, the way it flared with a gust of wind, the way it pulsed and roared, and began to see patterns, messages hidden in the dance of flames. From these observations, the first rituals emerged. To some, it was prayer, to others, instruction, and to a few, a roadmap to influence beyond mere survival. Fire became a mirror reflecting human curiosity, ambition, and fear, teaching lessons that would echo for millennia. As humans spread across continents, the reverence for fire evolved. In the vast plains and river valleys of early civilizations, fire was no longer only a tool for warmth or protection. It became a symbol. Sparks were interpreted as divine signals, smoke as messages rising to unseen gods, and the crackle of flames as the language of the universe. Some communities began to designate guardians of the flame, individuals whose task was to tend it, protect it, and interpret its messages. Even the simplest act of lighting a fire became laden with meaning. It was a ritual, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. And from these small sparks, the earliest forms of fire-based cults were born, humble yet potent, existing quietly at the edges of human awareness. The emotional power of fire in these early societies cannot be overstated. Around its glow, humans experienced a sense of unity and fear simultaneously. The warmth nurtured life, yet the shadows it cast whispered of danger. Night, previously absolute and unknowable, was now framed by a circle of light, a fragile barrier against darkness. The human heart responded instinctively, awe for what protected them, anxiety for what threatened them. These were the first lessons in influence, lessons that the earliest fire cults would later refine and exploit. Those who controlled the flame controlled perception, controlling both fear and devotion. But fire's significance extended beyond ritual and psychology. It became a bridge to knowledge. Early humans discovered that the flame could transform matter, raw meat into nourishing food, wood into tools, and clay into durable pottery. Each discovery carried weight, not just practical, but symbolic, demonstrating that fire could change the world in ways that mirrored divine creation. It was both a teacher and a weapon, and those who learned its lessons first gained an unspoken advantage over their peers. The first humans to grasp this duality, the delicate balance between creation and destruction, were, unknowingly, the ancestors of the powerful flame guardians who would one day manipulate kings and empires. There is a story, passed down in fragmented whispers across continents, of a lone tribe whose shamans understood fire in ways others could not. They observed it, experimented with it, and revered it not as a mere phenomenon, but as a living entity. Sparks were interpreted as guidance, smoke as warnings, and the unpredictable leaps of flame as signals demanding attention. This tribe survived storms, attacks from predators, and rival clans because they respected the flame's authority. Where others perished, they thrived. And though these details are lost to time, the principle endured. Mastery of fire was mastery of survival, influence, and, eventually, power. As fire became central to human life, it also became central to human imagination. Tales of eternal flames, celestial fire, and hidden embers began to surface in art, storytelling, and sacred practice. Humans began to ascribe intelligence to fire itself, believing it could judge, reward, and punish. The emotional resonance of fire, its ability to inspire both hope and dread, was the seed of something much larger, the birth of organized fire worship. From these humble beginnings emerged rituals that would grow in sophistication and secrecy, rituals designed not just to honor the flame, but to command respect, obedience, and even fear from those who witnessed it. And so, in the quiet of the first human nights, under skies untouched by city lights and beyond the reach of organized empires, the stage was set. Fire was no longer simply survival, it was influence. It became the heartbeat of early human ambition, a living force that could unify a tribe, terrify an enemy, or elevate a mere human into something close to godlike. This was the first flame, humble yet profound, simple yet laden with secrets. It was a spark that would one day ignite dynasties, topple rulers, and shape the course of history, long before anyone fully understood its full power. As the first humans gazed into its glow, they could not know the magnitude of what they had encountered. They saw warmth, they saw light, and they saw danger, but they did not yet comprehend the true secret. Fire was not just a tool or a gift. Fire was a force that could watch, judge, and decide. And for those who would later rise to manipulate it, It was the first whisper of a power that could quietly and irresistibly control the fate of empires. Long after the first humans learned to harness fire for survival, societies began to organize around it, transforming the raw spark into a symbol of authority, ritual, and devotion. Across the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, in the shadow of the rising ziggurats, and in the rolling hills of Anatolia, temples dedicated to sacred flames began to appear. These were no ordinary structures. They were designed to impress, intimidate, and communicate power. Massive stone walls, towering columns, and hidden chambers reflected not only architectural ingenuity, but a deeper, almost secret knowledge that fire could be controlled, revered, and used as a tool to shape belief and obedience. The heat that emanated from these sacred altars was more than physical warmth. It was a psychological force, capable of bending the will of all who approached. Inside these temples, fire burned constantly. Some flames were tended in bronze or gold braziers, while others rested in open pits lined with sacred stones. The flames were carefully nurtured and protected by priests, priestesses, and guardians who had dedicated their lives to understanding every nuance of its behavior. They observed how the fire danced, how smoke curled, and how embers fell, interpreting every subtle movement as a message from the gods. It was said that the fire could reveal the truth, illuminate deceit, and bestow blessings or curses on those who approached with impure intentions. The temple itself became a theater of awe, where light, shadow, and ritual converged to create an overwhelming sense of reverence. These temples were more than centers of worship. They were hubs of influence. Kings and rulers sought the counsel of the flame's guardians, believing that the fire could guide decisions of war, diplomacy, and governance. In some cases, the priests dictated the timing of campaigns, advised on the succession of heirs, or sanctioned marriages that would secure alliances. The flame's guidance, interpreted through careful observation and ritual, became a currency of power. Those who understood the ritual's subtleties could shape the destiny of entire kingdoms without ever raising a sword. And yet, all this influence remained hidden in plain sight. The flame's true authority was subtle, quiet, and invisible to the untrained eye. The emotional effect of these temples was profound. For the average worshiper, approaching the sacred flame was a mixture of awe, fear, and devotion. The priests orchestrated ceremonies with meticulous precision, chants and languages both ancient and mysterious, movements that mirrored celestial patterns, and offerings of fragrant woods, herbs, and rare metals. The fire responded, or at least appeared to respond, flaring higher, flickering in unexpected directions, or casting shadows that seemed to speak. To those who witnessed it, the flame was alive, conscious, and capable of judgment. And as history shows, perception often became reality. Fear of the flame compelled loyalty, devotion, and obedience, sometimes more effectively than any sword or decree. The guardians of these fires were a secretive and highly trained elite. They spent years studying the patterns of the flames, learning the hidden codes embedded in their movements, and mastering the rituals that controlled the perception of the faithful. Their knowledge extended beyond ritual into psychology, politics, and manipulation. They understood that power lay not in brute force, but in subtle influence. A flicker here, a sudden flare there, could convince a king to wage war, honor a treaty, or trust an advisor. Every action, every gesture, every carefully maintained ember contributed to a narrative of divine authority. In essence, the temple was not merely a religious site. It was a center of espionage, persuasion, and silent governance. Not all temples were the same. Some were enormous complexes with multiple altars and chambers for the public and elite alike. Others were hidden sanctuaries, accessible only to a select few who had proven their loyalty or lineage. Archaeologists and historians today uncover the remnants of these sacred spaces, noting subtle architectural features designed to enhance the fire's psychological impact. Labyrinthine corridors, sloped ceilings, and reflective surfaces manipulated light and shadow, creating illusions that magnified the flame's perceived size and power. Even the placement of entrances and viewing platforms was calculated to ensure that the fire's effect on the observer was as commanding as possible. Every detail reinforced a single truth: the flame was authority incarnate. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of these temples was their enduring secrecy. While they influenced kings and empires, very few records of their rituals survive in plain text. Knowledge was passed orally, through initiations, or encoded in symbols and carvings only decipherable by those who had been trained. Outsiders could observe the structures, marvel at their grandeur, or participate superficially, but the true essence of the flame and its capacity to command remained elusive. Even when empires fell and civilizations crumbled, the memory of these sacred fires persisted in myths, legends, and fragmented accounts, as if the flame itself refused to be extinguished. Stories from Mesopotamia describe flames that burned so intensely they seemed eternal, fed not only by physical fuel, but by ritualized devotion and precise ceremony. In Anatolia, secret cults are said to have preserved knowledge of these flames for generations, passing it down through initiates sworn to absolute secrecy. It was believed that the flame could not only guide rulers, but punish them. Kings who disrespected it faced disasters, defeats, or sudden death. Those who honored it prospered beyond expectation. This duality, reward and punishment, cemented the psychological grip of the temple and ensured compliance without open confrontation. The flames also played a central role in public spectacles. Festivals, processions, and ceremonies often centered around fire, creating a shared emotional experience for entire communities. The collective awe inspired by the blazing altars, the scent of incense, the rhythmic chants, and the flickering shadows made the flame a symbol of unity and power. But the true power of these events lay in the invisible hierarchy of influence, the unseen priest controlling perception and orchestrating belief. To the masses, the flame was divine. To the initiated, it was a tool. And it was in this careful manipulation of perception that fire temples held a secret dominion over human hearts and minds, shaping the destiny of societies long before the rise of written law or organized armies. Even today, remnants of these temples inspire fascination and speculation. Ruins hidden beneath sand, stone carvings that survive the ravages of time, and inscriptions hinting at rituals of flame all speak to a civilization that understood something profound. Fire was more than light and heat. It was power, influence, and control. The flames in these temples did not merely illuminate walls. They illuminated human desire, fear, and ambition. They became symbols of a hidden order, whispering to kings, guiding decisions, and silently shaping the course of history. In the end, the temples of heat were both physical structures and metaphors for the force they revered. Their fires burned for survival, for awe, for devotion. But above all, they burned as instruments of authority. And while time has reduced many of these great structures to ruins, the legacy remains. The flame still calls to those who seek power, knowledge, and mystery. It whispers that the first civilizations understood a truth still relevant today. control the fire, and you can control more than warmth. You can control destiny itself. In the flickering silence of the sacred halls, where the scent of smoke hung heavy in the air, figures moved like shadows around the eternal fire. These were the chosen few, the custodians, the interpreters, the guardians of the flame. To outsiders, they were priests and priestesses. To those who knew better, they were something far more powerful. Keepers of knowledge, stewards of divine energy, and silent arbiters of life and death. Their faces were hidden behind veils or masks, not merely to conceal identity, but to erase individuality. For the guardians, there was no I, no personal will, there was only the flame. Its hunger was their command, its whisper their law. To become a guardian was not a simple act of faith, it was a transformation. Initiation required sacrifice, not only of possessions and family ties, but of fear itself. Candidates were tested with trials of endurance, days of silence, nights spent in utter darkness, and the final test, facing the flame. It was said that during initiation, the chosen would sit before the sacred fire until its heat scorched their skin, until the smoke filled their lungs and their tears turned to steam. Only those who could gaze into the heart of the flame without flinching were deemed worthy to serve it. Those who faltered were never seen again. Whether they fled or perished, no one dared to ask. The flame accepted only the devoted. Once initiated, the guardians lived in near seclusion within temple walls. They spoke in coded language, communicated through gesture, and performed rituals so ancient that even they could no longer trace their origins. Their daily duties were both sacred and practical, feeding the eternal fire, cleansing the altars, interpreting omens, and maintaining the illusions that kept the faithful in awe. They understood how to manipulate air currents to make flames dance unpredictably, how to use rare minerals to make them flare blue or gold, and how to hide subtle mechanical contraptions that made the fire seem alive. But these tricks were not deception in their eyes, they were devotion. Each act was designed to remind the world that the flame was not to be questioned, only obeyed. The guardians' influence reached far beyond the temple walls. Kings sought their blessings before battles. Generals consulted them for auspicious days to march. Queens sent emissaries to plead for fertility, health, or the birth of heirs. Every royal court had a representative of the flame, a counselor who spoke softly but carried the invisible weight of divine authority. In public, the guardians appeared humble, heads bowed, voices measured. In private, their words could decide the fate of nations. A single nod, a whispered prophecy, or an interpreted flicker could set entire armies into motion. But with power came danger. Among the guardians, silence was survival. Secrets were currency, and betrayal was unforgivable. It was said that those who broke their vows were not exiled or executed in public. Instead, they simply vanished, their names erased from records, their existence consumed by the very fire they once served. Within the temple, trust was a delicate illusion. Every guardian watched the others with the same quiet intensity with which they watched the flame, aware that any misstep could mean the end. And yet, the institution endured. Generation after generation, the line of guardians remained unbroken, their knowledge preserved through whispers, hidden symbols, and ritualized memory. The relationship between ruler and guardian was one of both reverence and fear. The kings of old may have worn crowns, but the guardians held the torch that legitimized them. A coronation without the flame's blessing was unthinkable. A king without the fire's approval was no king at all. The guardians exploited this dependency with subtle mastery. They advised rulers, guided their beliefs, and reminded them, in moments of defiance, that even a monarch's life was a candle before the eternal fire. There are records of kings who ignored the temple's warnings, only to find their reigns end abruptly, through rebellion, famine, or mysterious illness. The chronicles attribute these downfalls to divine punishment, but behind the veil of faith, one can see a different truth. The Guardians' reach was long, and their vengeance swift. Despite their immense influence, the Guardians were not driven solely by ambition. Many truly believed they were serving a higher order, that their control was necessary to maintain balance between chaos and order, darkness and light. In their minds, the flame was a bridge between mortals and gods, a reminder that power, if left untempered, could destroy as easily as it created. And so, they justified their manipulation as preservation of empires, of faith, of the delicate equilibrium that kept civilization from crumbling into disorder. The line between faith and control blurred until neither could be distinguished from the other. Legends tell of one guardian whose devotion transcended all understanding. She was said to have spoken with the flame directly, receiving prophecies that shaped the destiny of her people. When a great war loomed, her visions guided the king to victory, earning her eternal reverence. But her end was tragic, consumed by the very fire she served. Some say she offered herself willingly, believing that her spirit would merge with the eternal flame, becoming its eternal voice. Others whisper that her death was no act of faith, but punishment for revealing secrets to the wrong ears. Her story, like so many others, was absorbed into myth, her name erased, her sacrifice remembered only in symbols carved deep into temple walls. Even now, archaeologists uncover remnants of their presence, altars blackened with soot, ceremonial tools, and inscriptions invoking light, judgment, and secrecy. Every discovery hints at a network of influence so vast that its traces span continents and millennia. And though time has dimmed the brilliance of their temples, the legend of the Guardians endures. It is said that somewhere, hidden from the modern eye, a flame still burns, tended by unseen hands. Its guardians remain, unseen and patient, waiting for the moment when the world once again seeks light in the darkness. For the Guardians of the Flame were more than priests. They were the custodians of fear, faith, and fate. They understood that the flame's true power did not lie in its heat or light, but in the hearts of those who believed in it. And so long as belief endured, so too would their dominion. Because as history has shown, empires fall, kings die, and temples crumble, but the flame and those who guard it remain. Fire, once a tool for survival and a symbol of divine power, became a weapon of influence in the hands of those who understood it. As empires rose from scattered city-states, the sacred flame was no longer confined to temple walls. It spread across battlefields, courts, and councils of power. Kings, generals, and rulers learned quickly that those who commanded the flame, or at least appeared to do so, could sway armies, intimidate rivals, and consolidate their dominion with subtle but undeniable authority. In these early societies, fire was more than light. It was persuasion, control, and in many cases the ultimate arbiter of fate. In Mesopotamia, historical accounts suggest that fire rituals preceded nearly every major decision of state. Before battles, kings would send emissaries to the temples, seeking the priest's interpretation of the sacred flame. Was it favorable to march east or west? Would victory crown their banners or curse their houses? The priests, silent and inscrutable, studied the dance of the flames, the curl of the smoke, and the shape of embers, delivering their guidance in words that were equal parts prophecy and intimidation. The kings, aware of the public's faith in these rituals, obeyed. A nod from the priest, or a subtle warning of divine wrath, could decide which city would fall and which would stand. In effect, fire dictated strategy, and the armies became instruments of its unseen will. But the influence of fire was not limited to decisions of war. It extended deep into politics and diplomacy. Emperors sought alliances, marriages, and treaties with the blessing of the sacred flame. To defy it was unthinkable. Even the most ambitious king feared the perception of disrespect, knowing that rumors of divine disfavor could destabilize a realm faster than any enemy army. In some accounts, emissaries carried miniature sacred flames to rival courts, a symbolic assertion that the power of the temple extended beyond borders. The flame became a diplomatic tool, a subtle yet potent assertion that control over fire equated to control over fate itself. Fire also shaped conquest in a more tangible sense. Pyrotechnics, early incendiary devices, and control burns were used strategically to terrorize enemies and manipulate the terrain. Records from Anatolia and early Mesopotamia describe armies whose first act upon entering hostile territory was to ignite controlled fires along the borders, not merely as destruction, but as a psychological weapon. Villages and fortresses surrendered without resistance, terrified by the unpredictable, consuming force that seemed almost alive. Here, the lessons of ritual and observation merged with practical application. The flame was at once divine, political, and military. Its reach extended into every aspect of conquest, and those who mastered it became nearly untouchable in influence. The human cost of this power was immense. Entire cities could rise or fall based on the priest's interpretation of a flickering flame. Generals who ignored the fire's warnings found their campaigns fail, soldiers perished, and legacies were erased. But in a paradox that still resonates today, the influence of fire rarely appeared as overt domination. It was subtle, psychological, and deeply entwined with the faith and superstition of the masses. Those who opposed the flame publicly risked not only their lives, but their legitimacy, while those who obeyed gained favor not only from the divine, but from the powerful human guardians who controlled the sacred spark. Across continents, the pattern repeated itself. In the valleys of the Indus, ceremonial fires were used to bless new rulers and mark territorial expansion. In the Nile shadow, priests of the eternal flame guided pharaohs in military campaigns and civic projects alike. Fire became an omnipresent symbol, simultaneously awe-inspiring and terrifying. It was a tool for shaping perception, for manipulating belief, and for securing obedience without the constant use of force. Soldiers, citizens, and rulers alike were compelled to act, not by sword alone, but by the invisible authority of flame and those who controlled it. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this influence was its combination of reverence and fear. Fire demanded devotion and respect, and through it, the guardians orchestrated power structures that transcended mere politics. Leaders who ignored these rituals risked catastrophe. Those who embraced them gained more than victory. They gained legitimacy, aura, and a perception of divine approval. And yet, this power was not always benevolent. Stories tell of kings deceived by manipulative priests, forced into campaigns they neither desired nor could win, only to be toppled when the flame's favor appeared to vanish. In these cases, fire acted as a double-edged sword, protector and executioner, guide and deceiver. The emotional and psychological resonance of the flame cannot be overstated. Soldiers reported an almost hypnotic effect when marching under banners blessed by sacred fire. Civilians trembled in awe during festivals, witnessing pyres that seemed alive, flames leaping unnaturally, smoke coiling in enigmatic patterns. Even today, we sense the primal pull of fire, the way it draws our attention, holds our gaze, and evokes both wonder and fear. Ancient societies harnessed this instinct expertly, using the flame to manipulate perception on a grand scale. In the battlefield, the temple, and the throne room, fire became a silent strategist, an invisible general whose influence extended far beyond what the eye could see. And yet, fire's dominance was fragile. Just as it could elevate, it could destroy. A mismanaged ritual, a failing altar, or the neglect of sacred flame could provoke public panic, lead to rebellion, or invite foreign conquest. History records rulers who fell not to swords, but to the perception that they had lost favor with the divine fire. In this way, the flame maintained a balance of fear and respect, rewarding obedience, punishing arrogance, and ensuring that even the most powerful rulers remained humble before its authority. The story of fire and conquest reveals something profound about human ambition. Empires were built not only on armies and gold, but on perception, faith, and manipulation. The sacred flame taught an early lesson, that true power is subtle, psychological, and intertwined with belief. Control over fire was more than mastery over a natural element. It was mastery over human minds. Kings could rise and fall at the discretion of those who understood the flame, and civilizations could expand or collapse depending on the rituals performed in smoke-filled temples. And so, as armies marched, cities burned, and treaties were signed under the watchful glow of sacred flames, one truth became clear. Fire had become a force that could shape history itself. Its influence was invisible yet undeniable, feared yet revered, sacred yet dangerously human. Those who controlled it were the unseen rulers of empires, and those who ignored it paid the ultimate price. The eternal lesson was simple yet profound. Fire, in the hands of the devout and knowledgeable, could conquer far more than land. It could conquer hearts, minds, and the very course of destiny. In the end, fire was more than a tool, more than a symbol. It was a teacher, a judge, and a silent strategist, guiding the rise and fall of civilizations. And as the first flames of conquest spread across the known world, the eternal question lingered. Who truly held power? The kings with armies, or the guardians of the flame whose influence reached far beyond the battlefield? Beyond the glow of the sacred flame, in the hidden corridors of temples and palaces, another force quietly dictated the course of empires: secrecy. Smoke, curling and twisting above the braziers, carried not only the scent of burning herbs, but the weight of knowledge carefully guarded from all but the most trusted initiates. Within these walls, secrets were currency, and the eternal flame was both witness and enforcer. What happened in the presence of the sacred fire rarely remained hidden from the guardians. Yet for the uninitiated, the rituals, the messages, and the true purpose of the flame were incomprehensible. The smoke itself became a veil, hiding truth from sight, whispering hints to those perceptive enough to notice, and leaving everyone else in awe or fear. Temples were constructed with an understanding of perception that rivaled any battlefield strategy. Labyrinthine corridors, hidden chambers, and secret passageways allowed the initiated to move unseen, to observe without being observed, and to control the narrative of the flame from a place of near omniscience. Ancient inscriptions, often overlooked by casual visitors, contained layers of meaning, encoded messages, and warnings. The guardians believed that knowledge held in plain sight was worthless unless veiled in smoke ritual, and symbol. Even the positioning of altars and torches was deliberate. Light and shadow were manipulated to conceal certain truths while amplifying others. It was a world in which perception and reality intertwined, and those who could read the smoke could see the hidden patterns of power. The smoke carried stories, some literal, some metaphorical. As it spiraled toward the temple ceiling, priests interpreted its movement, twists, and density as messages from unseen forces. Was a king sincere in his devotion, or plotting treachery? Would a harvest fail, or a war be lost? These subtle signals, drawn from the unpredictable behavior of the fire and the smoke it produced, informed decisions that affected thousands, sometimes millions. The untrained observers saw only incense and ritual. The guardians saw a map, a prophecy, and a warning. In the smoke, the guardians read the invisible threads of influence that connected leaders, warriors, and common people alike. Secrecy extended beyond ritual observation to the very knowledge of the flame. Ancient texts, when they survived at all, were written in cipher, symbol, or language known only to a select few. Oral instruction, memorized chants, and carefully choreographed gestures ensured that no outsider could easily penetrate the true purpose of the flame. Even among priests, knowledge was stratified. Higher initiates understood more, wielded more influence, and bore greater responsibility and greater danger. A slip of the tongue, a casual misinterpretation, or an ill-timed disclosure could not only destroy a career, but, in some accounts, result in death. In the world of fire cults, secrecy was survival, mastery, and power all at once. The guardians understood that fear was a tool as much as the flame itself. By carefully controlling who could witness the fire and who could not, they maintained authority over kings and commoners alike. The uncertainty of what lay behind the smoke created a psychological tension, a constant reminder that someone or something was always watching, interpreting, judging. This fear was deliberate, subtle, and profoundly effective. It ensured compliance without overt violence, reinforced devotion without coercion, and allowed a relatively small number of initiates to wield disproportionate power over entire civilizations. Yet secrecy carried its own dangers. Rival factions, ambitious outsiders, or curious scholars could uncover fragments of hidden knowledge, potentially unraveling centuries of careful control. Some fire cults responded with extreme measures, disappearances, coded punishments, and the destruction of evidence. It was said that even the smoke could become a warning, curling differently to signal betrayal or misalignment with ritual expectations. The guardians mastered both flame and perception, knowing that their authority depended not only on their skill, but on the illusion of omniscience. A temple that appeared empty could still wield power, because belief and fear extended beyond the walls themselves. Across continents, smoke veiled secrets that shaped history. From Mesopotamia to Anatolia, from the Indus Valley to early Mediterranean settlements, the guardians of the flame curated knowledge with precision. They recorded events selectively, erased inconvenient truths, and manipulated the interpretation of omens to suit strategic aims. The general population believed in divine will. Kings believed in prophecy, and the guardians, operating in shadow, quietly guided the outcomes of wars, political marriages, and succession disputes. The smoke of the temple was more than aromatic. It was a tool of narrative, a filter that shaped the understanding of reality itself. This smoke was not merely practical, it was deeply symbolic. In rituals, the curling plumes represented the intangible bridge between the mortal and the divine, between seen and unseen, between knowledge and mystery. It reminded participants that the flame, and all it represented, was beyond full comprehension. In doing so, it reinforced both reverence and obedience. Even when the rituals seemed elaborate or esoteric, the message was clear. The flame, and those who guarded it, understood truths inaccessible to ordinary mortals. The smoke, ephemeral and unpredictable, was a perfect metaphor for the power that could be held and lost, revealed and concealed, depending on the wisdom and skill of those who dared to command it. Among the guardians, mastery of smoke was as crucial as mastery of fire. They learned how to influence perception through its movement, to conceal or reveal symbols, and to guide observers' attention. Small gestures, a hand waved through a curling plume, a torch moved in a specific rhythm, could create the illusion of divine intervention or judgment. In this way, smoke became a medium for storytelling, strategy, and control. Wars could be won, alliances formed, and obedience secured, all with the subtle manipulation of perception, rather than the clashing of swords. The smoke of secrets also preserved the continuity of the flame itself. In temples that endured centuries, even millennia, knowledge of ritual, observation, and manipulation was passed down invisibly from one generation of guardians to the next. The unbroken line of secrecy ensured that, even as empires rose and fell, the influence of fire cults persisted. The smoke hid the mechanisms of power from outsiders while maintaining the illusion of divine omnipotence. It was the perfect instrument for shaping human behavior, ensuring that the eternal flame remained eternal not only in flame, but in authority. And so, in the curling, shifting smoke above sacred fires, the story of human ambition and manipulation continued. Secrets were preserved, fear was cultivated, and influence was extended far beyond the walls of temples. The smoke was a living witness, a silent judge, and a guide to those who had learned to read its whispers. For every empire shaped by armies or wealth, countless more were molded in shadow, quietly directed by the guardians who understood that knowledge hidden in smoke could be more powerful than any sword, more enduring than any throne, and more transformative than any crown. Among the guardians of fire, there existed a rare few whose connection to the flame transcended ritual, observation, and manipulation. These were the oracles of flames, individuals believed capable of hearing the fire speak, of perceiving messages encoded in its flicker, roar, and smoke. To the uninitiated, such claims bordered on legend or madness. To kings, generals, and emperors, the oracle's counsel was law, a bridge between human decision and divine mandate. Entire campaigns, political alliances, and dynastic choices were determined not by counsel of men, but by the enigmatic guidance of the fire itself. The oracle did not command armies, yet armies moved at the subtle hint of its whispered will. The selection of an oracle was a process shrouded in mystery. Not all who tended the flame could ascend to this rare status. Candidates were observed for years, their reactions to fire scrutinized for signs of extraordinary perception. Did they notice patterns in sparks that others overlooked? Could they predict the flame's behavior without prompting? Could they remain calm while sitting before a blaze for hours, attuning themselves to its rhythm? When one showed the potential to hear the hidden language of fire, initiation into oraclehood involved isolation, meditation, and exposure to the eternal flame until the boundary between self and element dissolved. Those who emerged were forever changed, their perception heightened, their insight both revered and feared. The oracle's authority was subtle but absolute. In the great courts of kings, a single pronouncement, interpreted from the flicker of a flame, could alter the course of entire empires. Should a general proceed with an invasion? Should a city be spared or razed? Should a ruler take the throne or abdicate? The oracle's words, couched in allegory and ritualized symbolism, carried the weight of divine observation. Nobles and monarchs obeyed, not merely from faith, but from recognition that to defy the oracle was to risk calamity, both political and personal. The flame was seen as infallible, and those attuned to it wielded a power that surpassed armies and treasury. Yet the oracle's insight was never simple. It was a dance of ambiguity, interpretation, and intuition. The flame spoke in paradox. A flicker could mean blessing or warning. A curling plume could signify loyalty or betrayal. The oracle's task was to discern intention, to translate these enigmatic signals into counsel intelligible to mortals, without stripping away the subtlety of the message. And herein lay the danger. Misinterpretation could provoke disaster, both for the rulers who sought guidance and the guardians who facilitated it. Entire campaigns reportedly failed not because of strategy, but because a misread flicker led a king to misjudge timing, location, or loyalty. The emotional gravity of the oracle's presence was profound. In a dimly lit chamber, with smoke weaving around columns, the oracle would sit before the flame in utter stillness. Nobles, soldiers, and emissaries would enter, their hearts pounding in awe and anxiety. Every breath, every gesture seemed amplified in the firelight. The oracle's silence, punctuated only by subtle movements or murmured interpretation, was both hypnotic and commanding. Observers often reported a strange sense of inevitability, as if every outcome had already been determined, and the oracle merely unveiled what the flame had already decided. Fear, respect, and devotion intertwined, creating a psychological hold unmatched by conventional power. Stories survive of oracles whose guidance changed the course of history. One such tale speaks of a distant city threatened by invasion. The oracle, observing the flame, advised the king to march not to the expected battleground, but to a hidden valley previously dismissed by generals as strategically insignificant. The result was a decisive ambush, victory credited to divine foresight. Another account tells of a ruler warned against trusting a seemingly loyal ally. Ignoring the oracle led to betrayal, overthrow, and exile. In both cases, the power of the flame was unseen, its influence hidden behind ritual, smoke, and interpretation, yet its effects were tangible and permanent. Despite their extraordinary authority, oracles were vulnerable. Their insight created dependence, and dependence bred envy and fear. Rivals within courts sought to discredit them, assassinate them, or manipulate their interpretations for personal gain. Even within the temples, oracles were watched by senior guardians, ensuring that their power did not eclipse the institution itself. It was a delicate balance. The oracle was supremely powerful, yet always subordinate to the flame, always reminded that mastery over fire was greater than mastery over men. Their lives were dedicated not to ambition, but to maintaining harmony between mortal affairs and the subtle will of the eternal flame. The oracle's influence extended beyond kings and generals. Entire populations were guided indirectly through their counsel. Religious festivals, city planning, and seasonal observances were adjusted according to the oracle's interpretations. In some cultures, the oracle's advice determined which crops to plant, when to harvest, and even which marriages were auspicious. It was a system that intertwined belief, survival, and social order. The flame's messages, filtered through the oracle, shaped not only politics but daily life, embedding fire as both literal and symbolic sustenance for the human soul. And yet, the flame remained untamed. Even the oracle could not command it fully. The fire could surprise, mislead, or test, ensuring that no mortal became complacent in their control. It was both partner and teacher, a force that demanded respect and vigilance. Legends speak of oracles who were consumed by the flame, either literally or metaphorically, in moments of hubris or error. Such stories reinforce the idea that the flame's wisdom was absolute, and even those closest to it were merely stewards, interpreters, and servants of its greater purpose. Symbolically, the oracle represented the apex of fire cult influence, the human embodiment of divine insight, the translator of chaos into guidance, and the keeper of secrets too potent for ordinary minds. Their existence highlighted the intricate balance between fear, devotion, and authority that fire cults had cultivated for centuries. Through them, the flame was made tangible, its whispers rendered actionable, and its mysteries preserved across generations. They were living bridges between humanity and the unknowable, guardians of knowledge too dangerous to exist without ritual, observation, and secrecy. In the grand sweep of history, the Oracle of Flames was a reminder that power need not be overt to be absolute. It could reside in shadow, in perception, and in the delicate dance between belief and fear. Armies could march, empires could expand, and kings could reign, but the invisible counsel of those attuned to the eternal fire often dictated the final outcome. In this way, the oracle became not just a figure of legend, but a testament to the enduring influence of fire itself, a force that shaped destinies quietly, invisibly, and irrevocably. Even the most meticulously controlled flame could not prevent human ambition, resentment, and defiance. Empires that seemed untouchable often faced moments of rebellion, not merely from external enemies, but from within, courtiers, generals, and even citizens who resisted the invisible authority of the flame. These uprisings were rarely direct assaults on the fire itself, for few dared challenge a force that was revered as divine. Instead, rebellions manifested in subtle ways. Plots against kings, secret alliances, and whispers that questioned the interpretations of the guardians. The smoke of the temple became thick with suspicion, and the eternal flame, though untouchable, flickered with the weight of human defiance. Rebellion often began as doubt. A ruler who once revered the flame might hesitate, question, or ignore counsel from the oracle. Generals might interpret signs differently, risking confrontation with both the sacred fire and the guardians who manipulated it. Citizens could lose faith, emboldened by hardship, famine, or corruption, questioning whether the eternal flame truly favored those in power. Even the guardians themselves were not immune. Rivalries within the temple could lead to factionalism, with some attempting to manipulate the flame's perceived will for personal gain. In this fragile ecosystem of fear, devotion, and authority, rebellion was always a possibility, an ember waiting to ignite. Historical accounts reveal remarkable instances where rebellion threatened entire kingdoms. One story speaks of a city whose rulers ignored repeated warnings from the oracle regarding an impending invasion. The guardian's interpretations, delivered through subtle changes in flame and smoke, were dismissed as superstition. Citizens, sensing the disconnect between divine guidance and human arrogance, grew restless. Secret factions formed, and alliances with neighboring states were forged in shadows. By the time the external army arrived, the city had fractured from within, its defenses crumbling not under the sword but under the weight of distrust, fear, and manipulated perception. The eternal flame, though still burning, had been disrespected, and its authority had, in effect, been challenged. The emotional intensity of rebellion was palpable. Citizens experienced a mixture of hope and terror. Hope that change could free them from invisible control, terror that divine wrath might follow. Soldiers felt conflicted, torn between loyalty to a ruler and fear of the unseen force embodied in the temple. Even the guardians were affected, their careful calculations disrupted, their rituals complicated by shifting allegiances. In these moments, the eternal flame served as both mirror and amplifier of human emotion, reflecting the fear, courage, and ambition of those who defied it, while silently demanding order and obedience. The response to rebellion was as calculated as the rituals that maintained the flame. Guardians did not always intervene directly. Subtle manipulations often sufficed. A well-timed flare, a change in smoke pattern, or the interpretation of an auspicious or inauspicious omen could sway minds, redirect decisions, and quell dissent without open confrontation. In some cases, leaders were removed under the guise of divine judgment, rebellions were diverted, and loyalty was restored, all while preserving the illusion that the eternal flame acted with impartial wisdom. The guardians had mastered the art of invisible governance, controlling revolt not through brute force, but through perception and belief. Yet not all rebellions could be contained. Some escalated beyond the guardians' influence, erupting into violence that consumed both rulers and their advisors. Historical fragments recount cities destroyed by internal revolt, temples desecrated by those seeking to assert independence, and flames extinguished through neglect or sabotage. In these cases, the collapse of authority often had long-lasting effects. Knowledge was lost, traditions were disrupted, and the delicate web of influence that the flame had created unraveled. The lesson was clear. Even divine fire could not completely shield its adherents from the unpredictability of human desire and defiance. Interestingly, some rebellions paradoxically reinforced the power of the flame. When uprisings were ultimately quelled, the victory was framed as proof of divine favor. The guardians interpreted the resolution as a demonstration of the flame's authority, using the aftermath to further cement obedience. Leaders who survived rebellion often became more devoted, more cautious, and more reliant on the subtle guidance of the oracle and the priests. Citizens who witnessed failure were reminded that the unseen force was inescapable. The eternal flame, through both conflict and resolution, maintained its grip on human imagination and behavior, teaching that defiance might rise, but its consequences were always dictated by a higher authority. The psychological impact of rebellion extended beyond immediate events. Stories of failed uprisings, mysteriously thwarted conspiracies, and the sudden downfall of those who dared defy the flame spread through generations. These narratives reinforced obedience and awe, ensuring that future leaders and citizens internalize the lessons of the past. Fear, carefully interwoven with reverence, became institutionalized. The guardians understood that perception was as potent as reality. The idea of rebellion, even more than its occurrence, could influence human behavior, directing loyalty and shaping destinies without a single blow struck in anger. Even myths and legends contributed to this dynamic. Some cultures wove tales of heroes who challenged kings or the guardians, only to be punished by the flame in mysterious ways. Other accounts described miraculous interventions, where rebels were spared or rewarded according to the hidden will of the eternal fire. In every story, the message was consistent. The flame was conscious, judgmental, and capable of rewarding or punishing as it deemed fit. The narrative reinforced fear and devotion, ensuring that rebellion, when it occurred, existed within the parameters defined by those who understood the fire. The interplay between rebellion and control highlights a central truth of fire cult influence. Power is most potent when invisible. Open confrontation is messy, costly, and unpredictable. Subtle manipulation, psychological insight, and the careful orchestration of perception allow a few to shape the actions of many. The eternal flame, tended by its devoted guardians and interpreted through the oracle, exemplified this principle. It was both a tool of spiritual devotion and an instrument of political mastery, capable of containing, redirecting, or extinguishing rebellion without resorting to force. Ultimately, the ashes of rebellion were never truly waste. They became part of the cycle of influence, feeding the lessons of history into the ongoing authority of the flame. Each uprising, whether successful or crushed, reinforced the understanding that human desire, ambition, and defiance were forces to be acknowledged, manipulated, and sometimes absorbed. The Guardian's control was not static. It evolved, adapting to the unpredictability of human nature, ensuring that the eternal flame remained a force that transcended time, fear, and rebellion alike. Within the heart of every temple, beyond the gaze of the faithful, the eternal flame demanded more than mere tending. It demanded ritual. These were not casual acts of devotion, but carefully orchestrated ceremonies designed to amplify the flame's authority, protect its power, and extend the influence of those who served it. The hidden rituals were intricate dances of perception, involving sound, movement, scent, and light, all carefully coordinated to create the illusion of divine presence. Every chant, every offering, every gesture was a carefully measured component of a system that blended spiritual devotion with psychological mastery. The priests and priestesses who performed these rituals understood the subtleties of human attention. They orchestrated the flicker of firelight to fall precisely on sacred symbols, manipulated shadows to create movement where there was none, and used smoke to hide imperfections while accentuating the flame's apparent vitality. Offerings were not random. Rare herbs, metals, and exotic oils were chosen for their visual and olfactory impact, heightening awe and reinforcing the perception that the flame was alive, responsive, and divine. Even the tempo of chants and footsteps was calculated to synchronize with the human heartbeat, creating a trance-like effect on participants. In this way, the rituals became a form of psychological architecture, shaping belief, fear, and loyalty. Some rituals were public, designed to inspire mass devotion and reinforce the authority of the temple in the eyes of the community. Festivals of fire, processions through city streets, and communal ceremonies drew thousands into a shared experience of awe. The flames seemed to move with them, flaring at moments of heightened emotion, sending smoke curling into the sky, as if communicating directly with the divine. In these spectacles, ordinary citizens glimpsed what they believed was supernatural power, reinforcing the idea that the temple, its guardians, and the flame were inseparable from destiny itself. Participation became a conduit of belief, and belief became a source of control. Other rituals were secret, reserved for initiates and the highest-ranking guardians. These ceremonies involved intricate sequences of movements, coded chants, and symbolic offerings whose meanings were decipherable only to those trained for years in the temple's hidden knowledge. Some of these rituals aimed to enhance the guardian's perception of the flame, heightening sensitivity to subtle shifts in light, smoke, and temperature that could convey messages from the divine. Others were designed to manipulate perception outside the temple, sending signals of favor or wrath to kings, generals, or citizens. The hidden rituals were the instruments through which the flame's authority extended beyond stone walls and sacred halls into the hearts and minds of entire civilizations. The preparation for these rituals was rigorous. Initiates spent months, sometimes years, mastering every detail: how to handle sacred tools without error, how to chant with perfect timing, and how to read and interpret the subtle responses of the flame. Mistakes were not merely embarrassing. They could undermine faith, diminish authority, or provoke disaster. Some records suggest that failures during ritual were punished, not publicly, but subtly. Misfortune would befall the guilty, serving as both correction and warning. Precision, discipline, and reverence were the lifeblood of ritual practice, ensuring that the eternal flame maintained its power, both visible and unseen. The symbolism embedded within rituals was profound. Flames represented life, purification, judgment, and divine presence. Smoke signified mystery, transition, and connection between mortal and divine realms. Gold and bronze reflected light, creating illusions that amplified the flame's apparent size and vitality. Even the placement of offerings conveyed messages: fertility, protection, allegiance, or warning, interpretable by those trained in the temple's esoteric language. Through these layered symbols, ritual became a medium of communication, a means of exerting influence, and a way to perpetuate the sacred order. Some hidden rituals involved what might be called early forms of psychological manipulation. Guardians could create illusions of divine intervention: flames that danced unnaturally, smoke that formed recognizable shapes, or sudden bursts of heat that seemed to respond to human action. Observers often attributed these occurrences to supernatural power, reinforcing devotion and fear. Yet behind every movement, every shift, every flicker was calculated intent. The Guardians understood that control over perception could be more powerful than control over armies. The rituals were designed to maintain the illusion of divine omnipotence, ensuring that human action remained aligned with the will of the flame. Legends speak of rituals so secret and intense that only one or two initiates witnessed them at a time. In these ceremonies, it is said, the flame communicated directly, imparting knowledge that could shape the destiny of rulers, empires, and entire populations. Some oracles claimed that during such rituals, the flame revealed future events, warned of betrayal, or illuminated hidden threats. The participants' senses were heightened, their minds tuned to subtle signals invisible to ordinary humans. It was a communion not just with fire, but with an idea of destiny itself, a sense that the universe's hidden patterns could be understood, interpreted, and acted upon, if one knew the secret language of flame and smoke. Even outside the walls of temples, hidden rituals influenced power. Priests instructed rulers on auspicious dates, advised generals on favorable battle strategies, and interpreted omens in ways that shaped public perception. The unseen hand of ritual extended into politics, diplomacy, and governance, demonstrating that the eternal flame's authority was not confined to sacred spaces. Through ceremonial timing, coded messages, and orchestrated symbolism, Guardians ensured that the flame's influence reached far beyond its physical boundaries, intertwining belief with power, perception with control, and devotion with destiny. Despite their complexity, hidden rituals were remarkably effective. They created a sense of order, legitimacy, and inevitability, fostering obedience and loyalty. Participants and observers alike internalized the belief that the flame was divine, that the guardians were its chosen intermediaries, and that human actions were observed, judged, and, when necessary, corrected. This combination of awe, fear, and reverence allowed the eternal flame to exert influence without overt coercion, demonstrating that subtlety and perception could shape the fate of nations as surely as armies or treasure. Ultimately, the hidden rituals of fire cults reveal a civilization that understood the extraordinary power of belief. They demonstrate that control over perception, combined with skillful manipulation of symbols and sensory experience, could create the illusion of divine omnipotence. Through ritual, the flame became more than fire. It became authority incarnate, capable of shaping behavior, guiding decisions, and embedding itself into the consciousness of those who witnessed it. The careful choreography of light, shadow, smoke, and sound ensured that the eternal flame remained eternal not only in physical form, but in influence, legend, and psychological dominance. In the end, the hidden rituals of the eternal flame were not merely acts of worship. They were instruments of power, mastery, and subtle control. Through them, the guardians transformed a natural element into a tool of empire, a symbol of divine favor, and a psychological anchor that guided the fate of rulers and ruled alike. The rituals preserved the flame, extended its influence, and ensured that the unseen hand of the guardians shaped history, often without anyone realizing that they were following a carefully orchestrated design. The eternal flame did not confine its influence to sacred halls or royal courts. It extended into the chaos of war, guiding battles, shaping strategy, and instilling fear and awe in both soldiers and civilians. Armies that marched under banners blessed by fire cults believed they carried divine favor, while those who opposed them often faltered under the psychological weight of unseen judgment. Fire became both symbol and weapon, a force whose presence could rally troops, intimidate enemies, and manipulate the outcome of conflict without a single arrow loosed or sword swung. Ancient accounts reveal that rituals before battle were meticulously performed, aligning military action with the perceived will of the flame. Priests and oracles interpreted the flicker of flames, the movement of smoke, and even the heat radiating from sacred fires to determine auspicious times to strike. The kings and generals who heeded these signs believed they were acting under divine guidance. Yet in reality, the guardians orchestrated perception, subtly influencing decision-making at the highest levels. Timing, position, and morale, factors that often decided victory or defeat, were shaped not only by strategy, but by the flame's interpretive counsel. Beyond prediction, fire was deployed directly as a psychological weapon. Signal fires, torches, and pyres created illusions on the battlefield, sometimes giving the impression of larger forces than existed, or simulating divine intervention to terrify enemies. The Guardians' knowledge of optics, smoke patterns, and environmental manipulation allowed them to create moments of awe and fear, causing confusion, hesitation, and panic. In some campaigns, the mere presence of the sacred flame in camp or on banners tipped the scales, demonstrating that the manipulation of perception could be as deadly as any weapon. Fire also influenced loyalty and obedience among troops. Soldiers who believed in the protective power of the flame fought with heightened courage, willing to endure extreme conditions, risk injury, or follow orders with unwavering faith. Conversely, those who believed themselves cursed or punished by divine fire often faltered, deserting, surrendering, or committing acts of desperation. The Guardians understood that faith, fear, and perception were as crucial in determining outcomes as swords, spears, and chariots. By controlling belief, the flame became an invisible general, its influence as decisive as the most brilliant military strategist. Some historical records hint at more extreme uses of fire during war, though they are fragmented and often veiled in legend. Entire fortresses were said to have been surrendered after elaborate rituals convinced defenders that the city had fallen out of divine favor. Spies and traitors, guided by the Guardians' subtle manipulations, relayed misinformation, creating chaos and mistrust. In these ways, the flame exerted control beyond the battlefield itself, influencing decisions, alliances, and morale across both armies and civilian populations. The flame's reach was invisible yet undeniable, shaping history while remaining untouchable. Yet, as with all tools of power, the use of fire in war carried immense risk. Misinterpretation, mismanagement, or overconfidence could lead to disaster. A poorly timed signal fire might expose positions instead of hiding them, or an ill-prepared ritual could fail to inspire troops. Some commanders who relied solely on the flame's favor found themselves ambushed or betrayed, leading to catastrophic defeats. The Guardians knew this risk well. Their influence depended not on brute force, but on precision, secrecy, and psychological mastery. The flame was powerful, but only when wielded with understanding and discipline. The emotional impact of fire in war cannot be understated. Accounts describe soldiers marching beneath torchlight that seemed to move with supernatural purpose, hearing chants, and seeing plumes of smoke that suggested omnipotent observation. These experiences created an almost hypnotic state, fostering cohesion, courage, and obedience. Fear and awe intertwined, producing a collective psychological response that could determine the outcome of campaigns long before any actual engagement. In essence, the flame served as both shield and sword, guiding behavior, shaping decisions, and embedding itself into the minds of combatants. Legends tell of battles where victory was attributed entirely to divine favor manifested through fire. Yet, when analyzed, it becomes clear that these miracles were often the result of careful planning, ritual manipulation, and psychological strategy orchestrated by the Guardians. The illusion of divine intervention reinforced loyalty, cemented obedience, and enhanced the authority of both rulers and priests. Through fire, the perception of supernatural power became inseparable from military strategy, demonstrating that belief, when skillfully managed, could be as decisive as any army. Fire's influence in war also extended to diplomacy and governance. Victories achieved under the flame's perceived guidance bolstered kings' legitimacy, deterred rebellion, and increased territorial control. Conversely, failure attributed to neglect or disrespect of the flame could destabilize rulers, emboldening rivals and encouraging uprisings. The Guardians' subtle orchestration ensured that outcomes reinforced the authority of the flame, maintaining a delicate balance between fear, reverence, and obedience. In this way, fire shaped not only immediate conflict, but the long-term structure of power and control. Interestingly, the flame's guidance was not always literal. Sometimes it was the rituals surrounding the fire, the symbolic displays, or the timing of ceremonial actions that influenced decisions more than the actual movement of flames. Kings and generals internalized these cues, adjusting strategies, timing, and alliances based on the perceived will of the fire. The Guardians, through ritual and observation, acted as invisible directors, orchestrating perception to ensure that the outcomes of war aligned with broader objectives of control, order, and influence. Ultimately, The flame in war demonstrates the fusion of spiritual authority and psychological mastery. Its influence reached beyond mere superstition. It shaped behavior, manipulated perception, and determined the fate of empires. Soldiers, citizens, and rulers alike were subject to a force that could inspire, intimidate, and guide, often without ever revealing its true origin. The eternal flame, through its guardians and oracles, transformed fire from a natural element into an instrument of strategy, a symbol of divine authority, and an invisible hand that silently directed the currents of history. The legacy of fire and war endures in the stories of empires that rose and fell, of victories won under torchlight, and of the unseen influence of those who understood its subtle power. It serves as a testament to the enduring lesson that control over perception, faith, and belief can be as decisive as any sword or army. In the smoke, light, and heat of the eternal flame, the ancient guardians taught a truth that resonates even today. The power to shape history does not always lie in force, but in mastery of the unseen and in the ability to command fear, awe, and devotion with precision, patience, and subtlety. After the smoke of ritual and the roar of war settled, what remained was often silent, yet profound, the whispers in the ash. The eternal flame left traces not just in memory, but in the remnants of burned offerings, scorched temples, and the fragile residue of its presence. These ashes were more than physical remnants. They were carriers of secrets, traces of power, and the echoes of human devotion, fear, and ambition. Observed carefully, they could reveal the hidden stories of kingdoms, the choices of rulers, and the subtleties of the guardians' manipulations. In the quiet aftermath, the ash spoke to those attuned, whispering messages that the uninitiated could never hear. Guardians, oracles, and priests interpreted the ash with the same precision applied to flame and smoke. Patterns formed in the residue of offerings were considered omens. The distribution of charred fragments could suggest favor or warning. A single misaligned token, a fallen sprig, or a displaced metal object could signal betrayal, impending disaster, or divine satisfaction. In the hands of those trained for decades, the ash became a map of intentions, alliances, and human behavior. Entire political maneuvers were subtly guided by these silent, whispering remnants. To the untrained observer, it was merely the aftermath of fire. To the guardians, it was a language, precise and unyielding, that shaped history from the shadows. Rebellion, fear, loyalty, and ambition could all be read in ash. When uprisings had been quelled, the ash offered insight into who had acted bravely, who had wavered, and who might harbor lingering dissent. Kings consulted priests before making post-battle decisions, relying on these subtle readings to reinforce alliances, reward loyalty, or punish defiance. Even minor miscalculations could have disastrous consequences. A misread symbol in the ash could lead to mistaken judgment, the downfall of an ally, or the unintended release of tension that ignited further unrest. The eternal flame's influence, filtered through ash, extended well beyond the moment of burning, embedding itself into ongoing narratives of power and control. The emotional weight of whispers in the ash was considerable. For citizens, warriors, and rulers alike, it was a reminder that no act, no matter how hidden, went unseen by the eternal flame. Fear and reverence lingered even after the fire had died down, creating a psychological extension of authority that outlasted the flame itself. Individuals internalized the belief that their actions were constantly observed, their loyalty tested, and their decisions subtly guided by a force beyond comprehension. The ash became a medium of accountability, a silent enforcer of behavior, and a testament to the power of unseen influence. Some accounts describe specialized rituals dedicated entirely to interpreting ash. Priests would gather fragments after sacred ceremonies or battles, arranging, sifting, and examining them with extraordinary patience and care. Symbols, shapes, and patterns were interpreted using complex systems that combined intuition, memory, and centuries of accumulated knowledge. These readings were used to advise rulers on political decisions, military strategy, and social governance. What appeared mundane, the remnants of burned offerings, was in reality a subtle yet potent instrument of guidance, revealing truths invisible to the untrained eye. Ash also served as a historical record. While written text could be lost, destroyed, or falsified, ash offered an immutable, though cryptic, testimony of ritual and action. Changes in texture, color, and distribution provided clues about human behavior, environmental conditions, and even the passage of time. Guardians relied on these clues to maintain continuity of practice, to correct deviations in ritual, and to ensure that the authority of the flame endured across generations. In this way, ash was a silent custodian, preserving memory and power in forms that were simultaneously subtle and profound. The symbolic importance of ash was equally significant. It represented the fleeting nature of human life, the impermanence of material achievement, and the enduring presence of divine or sacred authority. From a spiritual perspective, ash was both an offering and a reminder that mortality and devotion were intertwined. For rulers, it symbolized the consequences of hubris or neglect. For citizens, it reinforced humility and obedience. The guardians of the flame understood that ash could be both a lesson and a tool, shaping human perception as effectively as flame, smoke, or ritual. Legends recount moments when ash conveyed warnings of betrayal or danger. Subtle shifts in color, an unusual distribution of residue, or a peculiar odor were interpreted as signals of hidden treachery. Kings and generals relied on these readings to adjust strategies, preempt coups, or restore balance after unrest. The whispering ash became an unseen advisor, shaping decisions in ways that were invisible to the wider population. It was both intimate and profound, a conduit through which the eternal flame continued to exert influence long after the fire had faded. The Guardians' mastery of ash extended into the psychological domain. By demonstrating their ability to read what remained after a ritual, they reinforced the perception that the eternal flame was omniscient. Ordinary citizens, and even rulers, believed that nothing escaped the flame's scrutiny, creating a system of control that relied not on force, but on belief. This subtle authority, rooted in perception, interpretation, and the art of secrecy, allowed fire cults to maintain influence across generations, ensuring that human behavior remained aligned with the goals of the Guardians. In times of political intrigue, ash readings became a decisive tool. Kings consulting priests could alter alliances, redirect military campaigns, or enact punishments based on the whispers of burned offerings. Even the smallest fragment could reveal the hidden intentions of rivals, the loyalties of subordinates, or the potential outcomes of pending decisions. The flame, now silent, continued to shape history through these traces, demonstrating the power of subtle, indirect influence in a world where overt force was both risky and unreliable. Ultimately, whispers in the ash remind us that the eternal flame's authority was never purely physical. Its power was psychological, symbolic, and narrative-driven, embedded in the perception of those who observed and interpreted it. The flame lived on in memory, ritual, and interpretation, extending its influence far beyond the moment of burning. Through ash, the guardians maintained continuity, reinforced obedience, and shaped human destiny, proving that the most profound power often resides in what is left behind rather than what is immediately visible. The ashes, though silent, spoke volumes. They were a testament to the careful orchestration of perception, the enduring influence of ritual, and the subtle mastery of those who serve the flame. In them, fear, devotion, and ambition converged, creating a medium through which the eternal flame continued to shape empires, guide rulers, and influence the course of history. And as long as someone remained to read them, the whispers in the ash ensured that the legacy of the eternal flame would endure quietly, invisibly, and inexorably, shaping human destiny long after the fire had faded from sight. The eternal flame's influence reached its pinnacle in the courts of kings and emperors, where the dance between fire and crown became both literal and symbolic. Monarchs, already burdened with the weight of governance, recognized in the flame a force far greater than armies, wealth, or law. To rule effectively, they had to respect it, interpret it, and often bend their ambitions to its silent will. For the rulers, the flame was not simply an object of devotion. It was an arbiter of legitimacy, a measure of divine favor, and a subtle tool of power that could elevate or destroy without a single sword drawn. In coronation ceremonies, the presence of the flame was essential. The king or queen would approach the sacred fire, offering gestures, prayers, and symbols of allegiance. Oracles and priests interpreted the flame's behavior to assess the monarch's worthiness. A flicker in a particular direction, a sudden flare, or even the pattern of smoke rising from offerings could be read as signs of approval or warning. To the onlookers, this was divine judgment. To the rulers, it was a subtle yet unmistakable reminder that authority was never theirs alone. The crown was a symbol of power, but the flame determined how that power would be perceived, legitimized, and maintained. The relationship between flame and crown was also deeply political. Monarchs who ignored the guidance of oracles risked unrest, rebellion, or misfortune, often for reasons the uninitiated could never fully comprehend. A general's disobedience, a noble's treachery, or even a citizen's defiance could be interpreted as evidence of divine displeasure. By adhering to the counsel derived from the flame, rulers maintained not only favor with the gods, but the loyalty of subjects who believed the sacred fire oversaw every action. The flame became both moral compass and political instrument, guiding decisions while subtly constraining ambition. The psychological weight of the flame on rulers was immense. Kings and queens, aware of the flame's scrutiny, often experienced sleepless nights and anxious moments of introspection. Every choice, whether to go to war, sign a treaty, or execute a rival, was weighed against perceived signs from the fire. Fear of divine retribution, coupled with the desire to maintain legitimacy, produced a careful, deliberate, and often cautious style of leadership. Yet within this tension lay an extraordinary form of control. By appearing as an independent and divine force, the flame manipulated even the most powerful humans into compliance, creating a system of governance in which authority and obedience were intertwined with belief. Historical records suggest that some monarchs attempted to exploit the flame for personal advantage. They sought to manipulate rituals, control interpretations, or influence the oracle's readings to validate their actions. Yet such efforts were risky. The guardians of the flame were vigilant, and any attempt to dominate or deceive them could backfire catastrophically. Mistimed rituals, misread signs, or overt coercion often led to political failure, exile, or death. The flame's power, though subtle, was absolute in its own domain. It demanded respect, reverence, and adherence to established patterns, ensuring that even the crown remained accountable to forces greater than human ambition. The flame also acted as a stabilizing force in times of dynastic uncertainty. When succession was contested, or when internal strife threatened to destabilize the realm, the flame's interpreted messages could legitimize one candidate over another, turning uncertain claims into accepted authority. A carefully orchestrated ritual, performed in the presence of oracles and witnessed by the court, could settle disputes without bloodshed or with minimal conflict. In these moments, the flame functioned as both mediator and enforcer, ensuring continuity and reinforcing the perception that divine favor governed human affairs. Monarchs who honored the flame often found their reigns strengthened in subtle ways. Advisors and generals were more obedient, citizens more loyal, and rivals more cautious, convinced that divine observation dictated outcomes. Festivals, public ceremonies, and ritual offerings reinforced this perception, embedding the flame into the consciousness of the populace. Through these symbolic acts, the eternal fire became inseparable from the authority of the crown, ensuring that political and spiritual legitimacy were mutually reinforcing. The flame was invisible, yet its influence permeated every aspect of rule, shaping the decisions, actions, and perceptions of kings and queens alike. Yet, the relationship between flame and crown was not solely about obedience and control. It also inspired awe and ambition. Monarchs who believed in the flame's favor often pursued extraordinary projects. Grand palaces, elaborate temples, and monumental public works, each designed to honor the fire and signal divine approval. Such constructions reinforced the ruler's status, elevated cultural achievement, and perpetuated the guardian's influence. The flame, in essence, became a driver of civilization, channeling human ambition toward projects that blended devotion, propaganda, and artistry, leaving a tangible legacy that endured long after the ritual itself had ended. The interplay of fear, devotion, and strategy created a complex psychological environment. Rulers learned to interpret the flame cautiously, balancing ambition with humility and power with reverence. Every decision was measured not only against political necessity, but against the unseen judgment of the eternal fire. This delicate dance between authority and perception ensured that human action was guided by forces that seemed external, yet were carefully curated by those who understood the flame's subtle power. Monarchs became conduits of divine will, their crowns symbols not merely of political authority, but of sanctioned obedience to a greater, mystical force. Finally, the flame's role in shaping monarchs highlights the enduring theme of fire cults. That power is most effective when unseen, subtle, and deeply psychological. The flame did not rule through force, wealth, or coercion alone. It ruled through belief, perception, and fear. By intertwining the authority of the crown with the perceived omniscience of fire, guardians ensured that rulers became both subjects and enforcers of the eternal flame's influence. The crown, magnificent though it was, derived much of its strength from the silent, flickering fire that commanded reverence, obedience, and awe. The legacy of this relationship is striking. Across centuries and empires, the concept of divine guidance, mystical authority, and sacred legitimacy can be traced back to these intricate interactions between flame and crown. In every decision, every battle, and every ceremonial gesture, Rulers were subtly molded by an influence that seemed supernatural, yet was meticulously curated. The eternal flame, through oracles, guardians, and ritual, became an invisible architect of power, shaping human history with a precision and subtlety unmatched by any other force. Behind every flicker, every ritual, and every decree guided by the eternal flame, there were the flame keepers, guardians shrouded in secrecy, masters of perception, and arbiters of influence. Few outsiders ever glimpsed their lives, and even fewer understood the depth of their knowledge. They were not merely priests. They were historians, psychologists, strategists, and magicians of perception. Their lives were devoted to maintaining the balance between divine reverence and earthly control, ensuring that the eternal flame's power remained untouchable, incomprehensible, and absolute. The training of a flamekeeper was arduous, extending across decades. Initiates learned the sacred language of flame, ash, and smoke, mastering the subtle signals that conveyed divine favor, warning, or judgment. They studied celestial alignments, seasonal shifts, and natural phenomena, integrating them into the rituals that amplified the flame's influence. They memorized intricate codes, symbols, and chants, capable of directing perception without overt interference. Every movement, every gesture, every syllable was calculated, rehearsed, and refined to create the illusion that the flame itself acted independently, unbound by human hands. Flamekeepers lived double lives. In public, they appeared as humble custodians, quietly tending the sacred fires, offering prayers, and observing rituals. Yet behind closed doors, they were strategists, manipulating kings, generals, and citizens alike. They knew that perception was more powerful than force, and that subtle guidance could achieve results that armies and laws could not. Through orchestrated omens, interpreted messages, and carefully timed rituals, flamekeepers extended their influence across empires, quietly shaping events while remaining almost entirely invisible. Their power relied not only on skill, but also on secrecy. Knowledge was compartmentalized. No single flamekeeper knew every secret, and even among initiates, trust was scarce. Rivalries and factionalism were not uncommon, as the Guardians sought to protect their order from internal subversion. Secrets were guarded jealously, passed only to those deemed worthy, and often hidden behind layers of ritual, symbolism, and misdirection. The eternal flame's authority depended on this veil of mystery. Transparency would dilute its psychological impact, reducing the fire to a mere physical object rather than an instrument of divine power. The emotional burden of this secrecy was immense. Flamekeepers were constantly aware of the consequences of failure. A misread signal, a mismanaged ritual, or a careless disclosure could result in rebellion, political collapse, or the loss of lives. Fear and responsibility coexisted with devotion. They were custodians of destiny, interpreters of divine will, and enforcers of a delicate psychological order. Their lives were defined by discipline, vigilance, and the constant tension between faith, manipulation, and authority. Many spent lifetimes mastering the craft, yet no lifetime was sufficient to fully understand the flame. Among the flamekeepers, there were also hidden hierarchies. Senior custodians wielded extraordinary influence, able to shape the interpretations of oracles, guide the decisions of kings, and even alter the course of wars. Mid-level initiates performed essential but less visible tasks, maintaining rituals, observing offerings, and recording subtle patterns in flame and ash. At the lowest level, novices learned the language of symbols, memorized chants, and observed the actions of elders, gradually absorbing the principles that would one day allow them to manipulate perception with the same precision. This hierarchical structure ensured both continuity and control, preserving knowledge while preventing any single individual from becoming too powerful. The Flamekeeper's secrets were not only technical, but psychological. They understood human nature: fear, desire, ambition, loyalty, and doubt. They knew how to manipulate perception, amplify emotions, and create illusions that could inspire, intimidate, or control. A flicker here, a shadow there, a subtle scent or sound. These were all tools in their arsenal, designed to shape behavior and maintain authority. Through these methods, the eternal flame exerted influence far beyond the physical space of temples and shrines, embedding itself into the hearts and minds of rulers, citizens, and soldiers alike. Interestingly, some Flamekeepers used their knowledge for personal gain, subtly guiding events to favor themselves or their factions. Yet such maneuvers were always calculated, cloaked in ritual and symbolism, and carefully balanced to avoid exposure. Mistakes could be fatal. The Flame's authority depended on maintaining the illusion of impartiality. Even a hint that human hands were manipulating events too visibly could undermine belief, rebellion could follow, and the fragile control the Flame maintained could collapse. The line between guidance and interference was narrow, demanding precision, patience, and cunning. Legends suggest that Flamekeepers occasionally predicted events with uncanny accuracy. Some foretold revolts, assassinations, or natural disasters long before they occurred, their insights drawn from observation, analysis, and ritual interpretation. To outsiders, these predictions seemed miraculous, evidence of divine connection. In reality, they were the result of meticulous observation, accumulated knowledge, and the Guardian's understanding of human behavior and environmental cues. By combining spiritual ritual with analytical acumen, Flamekeepers transformed the eternal flame into a tool capable of shaping destiny itself. The secrecy of Flamekeepers also extended to the afterlife, or at least the perception of it. They cultivated myths that the flame observed souls, judged intentions, and could reward or punish beyond the mortal realm. These beliefs reinforced obedience, fear, and reverence, ensuring that both rulers and citizens internalized the idea that actions, even hidden ones, were never beyond the reach of the eternal flame. Through this psychological architecture, Flamekeepers maintained control over human behavior not only in the temporal world, but in the imagined realm of spiritual accountability. Ultimately, the secrets of the Flamekeepers reveal the true source of the eternal flame's power: mastery of perception, discipline, and subtle influence. They demonstrate that authority does not rely solely on force, wealth, or numbers, but on the careful orchestration of belief, ritual, and fear. By maintaining secrecy, controlling interpretation, and guiding perception, Flamekeepers transformed a natural element into an instrument capable of shaping empires, guiding rulers, and influencing generations. Their lives were defined by devotion, cunning, and an unrelenting awareness of the fragile balance between control and chaos. In the end, the Flamekeepers remind us that history is often shaped not by visible acts of power, but by invisible hands that guide perception, manipulate belief, and orchestrate events with precision. The eternal flame, tended and interpreted by these guardians, was more than fire. It was authority, influence, and the embodiment of control. Its secrets ensured that empires endured, rulers obeyed, and human behavior followed patterns often invisible, yet inescapable. In the shadows of temples, Amidst smoke, flame, and ash, the flame keepers maintained a dominion as enduring and mysterious as the fire itself. The eternal flame was never confined to a single empire or culture. Its influence spread across continents, leaving traces in the rituals, beliefs, and governance of civilizations separated by vast oceans and treacherous mountains. Traders, pilgrims, and wandering priests carried fragments of flame lore along trade routes and pilgrimage paths, ensuring that its mysteries traveled far beyond their original hearths. In this way, the flame became a shared secret of humanity, adapted to local traditions yet retaining a core power: the ability to command awe, inspire devotion, and subtly manipulate perception wherever it appeared. In Mesopotamia, chronicles hint at fire sanctuaries where kings sought divine counsel through the flicker of sacred flames. Priests interpreted smoke patterns and the behavior of the fire, guiding rulers on matters of war, diplomacy, and law. Across the Mediterranean, temples dedicated to fire deities rose along coastlines and in urban centers, integrating ritualized flame observation into political and social governance. Meanwhile, in the highlands of Asia, flame cults developed their own intricate practices, combining offerings, chants, and meditation with the natural cycles of the sun and the winds. Though separated by geography and culture, these societies shared a common thread: the perception that fire was alive, conscious, and capable of influencing human destiny. Trade routes facilitated the spread of flame practices as merchants carried not only goods, but also ritual knowledge. A merchant arriving from distant lands might bring small vials of sacred oil, herbs for offerings, or fragments of charred wood from revered fires, along with whispered instructions on their use. Local priests, eager to maintain favor with the divine, incorporated these elements into their own ceremonies, adapting foreign techniques to local customs. Over time, the cross-cultural exchange of flame knowledge created a network of fire sanctuaries whose influence transcended borders. The flame became both a physical and cultural bridge, connecting empires through shared reverence and mystery. The adaptation of flame rituals to local customs was subtle yet profound. In some regions, fire was associated primarily with purification. In others, it symbolized judgment, fertility, or protection. Yet across all cultures, the central principle remained: fire demanded respect, observation, and ritualized interaction. Guardians of the flame, whether priests, shamans, or oracles, understood that perception was as important as substance. A fire observed with reverence could bend decisions, instill fear, and enforce obedience, no matter the language spoken or the gods worshipped. The universality of this principle allowed flame cults to thrive across continents and generations. In some civilizations, the flame became closely intertwined with ruling dynasties. Kings incorporated fire rituals into coronations, treaties, and military campaigns, recognizing the psychological power the sacred fire wielded over subjects and rivals alike. The flame was more than a symbol. It was an invisible enforcer of loyalty and a source of perceived legitimacy. Monarchs who honored the flame gained not only divine favor in the eyes of their people, but also a subtle control over advisors, generals, and bureaucrats whose actions were influenced by fear, devotion, and awe. Across continents, the patterns of authority established around the flame were remarkably consistent, despite cultural differences. Explorers and emissaries documented these practices with fascination, though often in secrecy. Descriptions of flame rituals in distant lands circulated among scholars, religious leaders, and political elites, enhancing the flame's mystique and reinforcing its reputation as a universal instrument of influence. Such accounts, sometimes exaggerated or mythologized, spread along maritime and overland routes, creating the impression of a pervasive, almost supernatural force that transcended culture, climate, and politics. The flame, though physically localized in each temple, became conceptually global, an invisible thread connecting civilizations through mystery, ritual, and perceived power. Fire's role in cross-continental influence was also strategic. Guardians could leverage shared rituals and beliefs to coordinate alliances, negotiate treaties, and manipulate perception across vast distances. A temple in one empire might send signals through pilgrimage routes or coded messages embedded in ritual offerings to a distant ally, ensuring alignment of political and spiritual agendas. The flame became both a tangible object of devotion and a medium of indirect communication, extending influence far beyond the immediate presence of priests or kings. Across continents, the invisible hand of the eternal flame shaped events without leaving overt evidence of its control. The psychological impact of fire in distant lands was reinforced by secrecy and myth. Travelers spoke of sacred flames that never extinguished, of rituals that revealed hidden truths, and of priests who could predict outcomes with uncanny accuracy. These stories, whether factual or embellished, spread through oral tradition, reinforcing awe and compliance in populations thousands of miles from the original flame sanctuary. Fear and reverence became universal tools, allowing the influence of the eternal flame to penetrate even cultures that had no direct contact with the originating cults. Its psychological reach exceeded its physical presence, demonstrating the extraordinary power of perception across human societies. Despite the distance, the flame maintained continuity through meticulous ritual observation and interpretation. Guardians documented techniques, observed environmental factors, and transmitted their knowledge through careful apprenticeship. A novice trained in one region could, in theory, continue practices in a distant land, preserving the core principles of flame manipulation while allowing local variations. This careful stewardship ensured that the flame's authority remained consistent, credible, and psychologically potent, no matter where it appeared. Across continents, fire sanctuaries became nodes in a network of influence, each linked by belief, ritual, and the subtle control exercised by guardians. The flame's cross-continental presence also fostered cultural exchange. Artifacts, symbols, and ritual objects traveled alongside trade goods, influencing artistic, religious, and political development in distant regions. Temples, palaces, and ceremonial architecture reflected this diffusion, with shared motifs suggesting a common reverence for fire's mysterious power. These shared elements reinforce the perception of a universal, almost cosmic authority, subtly shaping human cognition, behavior, and governance across civilizations. Through fire, cultures were connected not only by commerce and conquest, but by belief and psychological influence, creating a web of subtle, far-reaching control. Ultimately, the eternal flame across continents reveals the universality of human psychology and the extraordinary power of belief. By maintaining rituals, guarding secrets, and carefully shaping perception, flame cults influenced rulers, populations, and entire civilizations across vast distances. Fire became more than a symbol. It was a tool of authority, a psychological instrument, and a shared language of power that transcended culture, geography, and time. Across continents, the eternal flame endured, demonstrating that the most subtle, invisible forces, when understood and applied with mastery, could shape the destiny of humanity in ways that remain mysterious, profound, and unforgettable. The eternal flame was not only a symbol of divine power or political authority. It was also a keeper of forbidden knowledge, secrets that mortal minds were rarely meant to grasp. Within the flickering glow of sacred fires, flame keepers recorded observations, compiled coded instructions, and preserved wisdom that spanned centuries. Some of this knowledge concerned the natural world, methods of observation, medicinal plants, astronomical cycles, or ecological patterns. Other secrets were far darker. Insights into human psychology, the mechanics of influence, and the ways in which fear, devotion, and belief could be manipulated to control entire populations. Guardians of the Flame treated this knowledge as both sacred and dangerous. Initiates were trained over decades, gradually introduced to these truths in layers that balanced understanding with obedience. The reasoning was simple. Too much knowledge too soon could corrupt, seduce, or destroy. Flame keepers believed that mastery required discipline, patience, and respect, and that forbidden truths wielded carelessly could unravel societies, spark rebellion, or invite catastrophe. The flame itself, ever-burning and eternal, became a symbol not only of power but of restraint, a reminder that some truths, though accessible, were not meant for unchecked use. Some manuscripts hidden near sacred flames contain hints of technologies and strategies that appear astonishing even by modern standards. Records describe methods of calculating celestial events with incredible precision, systems for predicting floods and droughts, and techniques for psychological influence that allowed rulers to manipulate subjects without violence. Across continents, flame cults preserve these methods, adapting them to local environments and political conditions. What outsiders saw as superstition or ritual often masked sophisticated understanding of human behavior, natural cycles, and societal mechanics. The flame's secret knowledge was thus both mystical and practical, a dual instrument of control and insight. Forbidden knowledge was not only functional, it was also moral. Flame keepers debated, sometimes bitterly, how and when such truth should be shared with rulers or the public. Revealing too much could empower ambition or greed, while withholding too much could weaken authority or invite disaster. In these deliberations, fire became a silent moderator, its flicker, crackle, and warmth guiding the guardians' decisions, or at least shaping their perception of divine approval. The flame, in essence, acted as an invisible arbiter, ensuring that knowledge was administered with precision, subtlety, and care. The psychological dimension of forbidden knowledge cannot be overstated. Understanding the ways humans respond to fear, devotion, and awe allowed flame keepers to guide entire populations. They could reinforce loyalty, suppress dissent, and influence decision-making in ways that appeared natural, inevitable, or divinely inspired. Kings who consulted the flame were often astonished by the accuracy of its advice, unaware that the guardian's manipulation of knowledge, ritual, and perception accounted for what seemed miraculous. The flame, through its custodians, created a framework in which human behavior could be predicted, nudged, and controlled without overt force. Legends tell of flame keepers who possessed knowledge so profound it bordered on the supernatural. They could identify traitors through subtle observation, anticipate revolts before they occurred, or predict natural disasters with astonishing precision. To the uninitiated, these abilities seemed miraculous, yet they were grounded in meticulous study, long-term observation, and an understanding of patterns that most humans could not perceive. The flame preserved this wisdom, ensuring that it remained potent, hidden, and inaccessible to those untrained in its careful interpretation. The dangers of forbidden knowledge were real and immediate. Initiates who misused secrets faced harsh consequences: ostracism, punishment, or death. Even rulers who attempted to exploit the flame's insights for personal gain risked political collapse or social unrest. Stories abound of monarchs whose ambition outpaced their understanding of fire's authority, leading to disastrous outcomes: failed campaigns, betrayals, or uprisings that decimated dynasties. The guardian's restraint was thus as essential as their skill. The flame's power could not be divorced from discipline, oversight, and an unwavering respect for its mysteries. In some cultures, forbidden knowledge included esoteric teachings about life, death, and the cosmos. Flame keepers studied the cycles of nature, the phases of the moon, and the positions of the stars, integrating these observations into both ritual and governance. They developed coded systems of symbolism, hidden meanings embedded in chants, offerings, and architecture, all designed to communicate subtle truths to those trained to perceive them. To outsiders, these practices appeared mystical or ornamental. In reality, they were precise, deliberate systems of knowledge transmission, ensuring continuity across generations. The moral ambiguity of forbidden knowledge is striking. Flamekeepers understood that wisdom and power are inseparable, yet both are perilous without ethical stewardship. Decisions guided by the flame could save civilizations or condemn them, depending on interpretation, timing, and human temperament. The flame, though silent, served as a constant reminder that with great insight comes responsibility, a lesson that ensured both obedience and humility among those who wielded its secrets. Ultimately, the flame's role as a keeper of forbidden knowledge demonstrates that its power was multidimensional. It was not merely symbolic or psychological. It was a repository of information, strategy, and insight that shaped empires, guided rulers, and influenced human behavior across centuries. Through the careful stewardship of flame keepers, knowledge was preserved, transmitted, and applied in ways that balanced utility, secrecy, and reverence. The eternal flame thus became a living archive, a teacher, and a subtle manipulator, whose wisdom was as enduring as the fire itself. Through fire, the guardians wielded knowledge in ways that remain enigmatic even today. Patterns in smoke, flickers of light, and remnants of ash became codes, messages, and guides, allowing the eternal flame to influence history indirectly yet decisively. Civilizations that recognized its authority flourished. Those that neglected its counsel often stumbled. By controlling who could access knowledge, and under what circumstances, flamekeepers ensured that the eternal fire remained a source of power, awe, and subtle dominion, its influence quietly shaping the course of human destiny for centuries. In the shadows of temples, in the careful observation of smoke and ash, and in the silent whisper of flamekeepers, the forbidden knowledge of the eternal fire endured. It was a force simultaneously mystical, practical, and moral, a reminder that human ambition, curiosity, and fear could be guided by subtle influence more effectively than by brute force. The flame preserved its secrets through discipline, perception, and patience, ensuring that its power endured, shaping rulers, societies, and empires with a mastery invisible to those who failed to perceive its deeper truth. The eternal flame did not burn in isolation. Its power was amplified through carefully orchestrated rituals, where fire and shadow danced together to convey meaning, authority, and mystery. These ceremonies were meticulously designed, blending light, darkness, sound, and sent into a choreography that commanded attention and awe. Shadows cast by the flames were interpreted as omens, guides, or even warnings, and their movement across temple walls, sacred altars, and ceremonial spaces was observed with the same intensity as the fire itself. In these rituals, light and shadow became tools, shaping perception and reinforcing the authority of the flame. Rituals varied across cultures, yet all shared a common principle: the careful manipulation of perception to influence behavior. In some temples, flames were positioned to cast elongated shadows over statues or symbols, creating the illusion of divine presence or movement. Priests and flame keepers moved among the shadows, performing precise gestures timed with the flicker of fire, giving the impression that the eternal flame was alive, responsive, and aware. To onlookers, this interplay of light and dark seemed miraculous, as if the gods themselves had descended into the temple. Yet it was the result of meticulous human design, observation, and mastery. The combination of fire and shadow served multiple purposes. Spiritually, it reinforced the sense of divine authority, inspiring devotion and humility among participants. Politically, it acted as a subtle form of control, reinforcing the perception that the eternal flame was omniscient and capable of influencing the fate of individuals and kingdoms. Emotionally, the dramatic contrasts heightened fear, awe, and anticipation, making rituals unforgettable and psychologically potent. Every movement, every flicker, and every whispered chant was calibrated to create maximum impact, ensuring that the flame's influence extended far beyond the moment of ceremony. Flame keepers employed advanced techniques to enhance these rituals. Mirrors, reflective surfaces, and polished metals were sometimes placed strategically to multiply the flickering light, producing complex patterns of illumination and shadow. Colored oils, powders, and incense altered the hue, texture, and movement of fire, creating ethereal effects that mesmerized observers. Even architectural elements, columns, arches, and alcoves, were deliberately designed to manipulate the projection of shadows, enhancing the sacred atmosphere and reinforcing the illusion of divine presence. Every element of space, matter, and perception was used to communicate meaning, demonstrate authority, and maintain control. The rituals were not solely for spectacle. They carried encoded messages and hidden knowledge. Specific sequences of movement, the timing of offerings, and the interaction between shadow and flame conveyed information to trained flame keepers while appearing as simple ceremonial acts to the uninitiated. A gesture unnoticed by ordinary participants could signal approval, warn of danger, or reveal insights about loyalty, obedience, or moral character. Through these layered rituals, the flames served as both spectacle and instrument, simultaneously inspiring devotion and guiding behavior in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Shadow, in particular, held a unique power. Its ambiguity created uncertainty, fear, and imagination, which flame keepers skillfully leveraged. Humans are wired to respond to partial information, filling in gaps with expectation, superstition, or awe. By controlling the interplay of light and shadow, guardians of the flame manipulated perception, making participants believe they glimpsed divine intent, imminent threat, or secret knowledge. This psychological manipulation reinforced obedience and awe, extending the influence of the flame far beyond the physical reach of its fire. Timing was critical in these rituals. Certain moments, sunrise, sunset, equinoxes, or solstices, were considered charged with power, enhancing the perceived authority of the flame. Seasonal variations influence the color and movement of light, the formation of shadows, and the interaction with sacred architecture. Flamekeepers meticulously planned ceremonies around these temporal factors, ensuring that the emotional and psychological impact of the ritual was maximized. A poorly timed ritual could diminish authority, while precise orchestration elevated perception to the level of the miraculous. Rituals of fire and shadow also served to transmit knowledge subtly. Novices observed the ceremonies repeatedly, learning patterns, interpretations, and techniques that would guide them as future flamekeepers. Symbols encoded in shadows, gestures, and flame movement acted as a living curriculum, blending observation, memory, and intuition. These rituals ensured continuity across generations, preserving not only technical skills, but also the psychological mastery necessary to maintain the flame's authority. Knowledge was transmitted silently, visually, and experientially, embedded in awe, mystery, and reverence rather than written text. The emotional power of these rituals was immense. Participants reported feelings of transcendence, fear, and awe, often believing they had encountered divine presence directly. Kings and rulers were particularly susceptible, interpreting subtle signals in flame and shadow as guidance for political decisions, military campaigns, or governance. Ordinary citizens internalized lessons of obedience, humility, and reverence, reinforcing social cohesion and the perceived legitimacy of ruling authorities. In this way, fire and shadow became both symbolic and practical instruments of power, shaping human behavior and societal structures across generations. The rituals also reinforced the perception that the eternal flame was eternal, omniscient, and alive. Through careful manipulation of movement, light, and shadow, flamekeepers created the impression that the fire was not bound by human control, even though every element was meticulously orchestrated. This duality, visible yet controlled, seemingly independent yet carefully guided, was central to the flame's enduring influence. Participants were never certain where human skill ended and divine power began, enhancing the psychological potency of the ritual and reinforcing obedience, awe, and belief. Finally, these rituals remind us that the eternal flame's authority was as much psychological as it was physical. Fire alone was impressive, but paired with shadow, ritual, and perception, it became a tool capable of shaping behavior, guiding decisions, and sustaining belief across generations. The careful choreography of light and darkness, combined with precise timing, symbolism, and subtle instruction, created experiences that were unforgettable, transformative, and deeply influential. In these sacred spaces, the flame and shadow became instruments of control, awe, and revelation, demonstrating that the most powerful forces often operate in ways invisible to the untrained eye, yet impossible to ignore. The legacy of these rituals endures. Across civilizations, the interplay of fire, shadow, and ceremony continues to inspire awe, reverence, and curiosity. Even today, echoes of these practices can be found in sacred architecture, festival traditions, and cultural symbolism, revealing the enduring impact of Flamekeeper's mastery. The rituals of fire and shadow were not merely displays. They were mechanisms of influence, psychological instruments, and vessels of knowledge that allowed the eternal flame to shape perception, behavior, and history with a precision unmatched by any other force. The eternal flame depended on its unseen protectors, the guardians who operated in the shadows, ensuring that its power remained untouchable, its secrets intact, and its influence absolute. These individuals were more than mere priests or attendants. They were strategists, historians, and psychological architects, entrusted with the flame's survival and the continuation of its authority across generations. Few knew their true identities, fewer still understood the depth of their knowledge, and almost no outsider ever glimpsed the full extent of their influence. Their lives were defined by devotion, discipline, and an intimate understanding of human nature, society, and perception. Guardians were selected from a young age, often from families with long-standing ties to flame cults or through careful observation of prodigious talent and aptitude. Initiates underwent years of rigorous training, learning to read the subtlest cues in flame, shadow, and smoke, as well as mastering the art of persuasion, diplomacy, and secrecy. Their education combined ritual practice with the study of human behavior, history, and the natural world, creating a cadre of individuals uniquely capable of shaping events without overt force. To outsiders, they were custodians. In truth, they were invisible architects of power. Secrecy was the lifeblood of the Guardians. Knowledge was compartmentalized, distributed only to those deemed worthy, and often encoded in symbols, chants, and ritual gestures. The Guardians understood that transparency could undermine the flame's authority. Once people suspected that human hands controlled the divine fire, its psychological potency would diminish. This meticulous protection of information ensured that the flame remained both revered and feared, its influence seemingly independent, omniscient, and eternal. Every act of guardianship was a delicate balance between revelation and concealment. The Guardians' responsibilities extended far beyond the temple walls. They advised kings, queens, and political leaders, guiding decisions that could alter the fate of entire empires. Through subtle omens, carefully interpreted messages, and orchestrated rituals, they ensured that rulers acted in ways that aligned with the flame's authority. Even minor officials and generals were influenced by these practices. Obedience, loyalty, and fear were cultivated at every level, creating a society where the flame's invisible hand subtly governed behavior. In essence, guardians were the hidden power behind visible power, shaping history while remaining largely unseen. Psychology was their most potent tool. Guardians studied fear, devotion, and ambition, understanding how human minds could be influenced without force or coercion. They knew how to instill awe through ritual, manipulate perception through controlled displays of flame and shadow, and enforce obedience through symbolic gestures. These techniques were applied not only to rulers, but to entire populations, reinforcing social hierarchies, maintaining political stability, and ensuring that the authority of the flame remained unquestioned. In every act, the Guardians operated with precision, patience, and strategic intent. Guardians also maintained the continuity of flame knowledge. They documented rituals, recorded interpretations, and trained novices to continue the sacred practices across generations. This preservation of expertise ensured that even as empires fell or dynasties changed, the flame's influence endured. Novices learned through observation, repetition, and coded instruction, gradually absorbing the principles of manipulation, ritual, and psychological mastery. By blending secrecy with apprenticeship, the Guardians ensured the flame remained a consistent force in human history, transcending temporal and geographic boundaries. The dangers faced by Guardians were real and constant. A single misstep, a misread sign, a misinterpreted omen, or a ritual performed incorrectly could result in chaos, rebellion, or political collapse. Rival factions within the cult sometimes attempted to seize control, creating internal threats that required vigilance, cunning, and sometimes ruthless action. Guardians balanced these risks with devotion, understanding that the flame's power depended on discipline, skill, and the maintenance of secrecy. Their lives were defined by constant vigilance, a relentless commitment to precision, and the understanding that the flame's influence could not be taken for granted. Legends speak of guardians who intervened in crises with extraordinary subtlety. One account describes a general poised to betray his king, only to be redirected through a carefully orchestrated flame ritual that made him believe divine intervention had guided him. Another recounts a famine alleviated through advice derived from observing subtle changes in the flame, guiding rulers to act with foresight and precision. To the public, these events seemed miraculous or divinely orchestrated, yet they were the result of the guardian's skill, insight, and strategic application of flame knowledge. Guardians were also the ultimate arbiters of morality within the flame cult. They determined which knowledge could be revealed, which rituals performed, and which actions sanctioned. Their judgment balanced spiritual guidance with practical consequences, ensuring that the power of the flame was neither abused nor misunderstood. They understood that authority without restraint could corrupt, and knowledge without discipline could destroy. By regulating the flame's influence, they maintained a delicate equilibrium between fear, devotion, and obedience, allowing empires to flourish while preserving the sanctity and potency of the fire itself. Across continents, the Guardians' network functioned as an invisible web, connecting distant temples, rulers, and communities. Through coded rituals, pilgrimage routes, and shared symbolic language, they coordinated influence, reinforced belief, and maintained continuity. Even in lands separated by mountains, deserts, and oceans, the flame's authority remained consistent, its power silently exerted through subtle, precise, and coordinated action. This network demonstrates that the flame's true strength lay not merely in its physical presence, but in the Guardian's ability to extend its influence far beyond immediate sight. Finally, the legacy of the Guardians reminds us that human history is often shaped by invisible hands, subtle manipulations, and carefully maintained perception. The eternal flame's survival and enduring power depended on their vigilance, discipline, and mastery of both ritual and psychology. They ensured that the flame remained not just a fire, but a symbol, a tool, and an instrument of influence capable of shaping rulers, empires, and societies. Through shadows, flame, and secrecy, the Guardians created a system of authority and perception that endured for centuries, leaving a mysterious, indelible mark on human civilization. Even the most disciplined guardians of the eternal flame could not completely eliminate dissent, ambition, or the lure of forbidden knowledge. Across empires, whispers of rebellion and conspiracy circulated like smoke through the shadows of temples and palaces. Some sought to challenge the authority of the flame, attempting to seize control of its rituals, interpretive power, or psychological influence. Others sought to exploit its secrets for personal gain, believing they could manipulate what even the most skilled guardians struggled to maintain. In these clandestine movements, the eternal flame became both a prize and a weapon, its power capable of igniting loyalty or inciting treachery. Rebellion often began subtly. Dissatisfied courtiers, ambitious generals, or cunning merchants would observe the rituals, looking for weaknesses in the Guardian's orchestration of flame, shadow, and perception. They studied coded movements, timing of offerings, and subtle gestures, seeking patterns they could exploit. Even a single mistake by a Guardian, a misinterpreted omen, a poorly executed ceremony, or an unnoticed lapse in ritual precision could become a spark, igniting a chain of intrigue, suspicion, and ultimately rebellion. The eternal flame, so carefully controlled, was paradoxically vulnerable precisely because of its power. Anyone who understood even part of its mechanism could become a formidable threat. Conspiracies were often built on alliances between insiders and outsiders. Courtiers might secretly correspond with neighboring rulers, sharing fragments of knowledge, ritual techniques, or psychological manipulations gleaned from observing flame ceremonies. Some conspirators exploited popular belief in divine intervention, manipulating crowds or soldiers to challenge authority while appearing as champions of the gods. Flame keepers recognized these threats, yet their power depended on subtlety. Overt confrontation risked exposing their secrets and undermining the perceived autonomy of the eternal fire. Conflict had to be managed quietly, strategically, and with precision. One of the most dangerous forms of rebellion involved attempts to replicate or steal the flame itself. Myths describe ambitious rulers or cults trying to recreate eternal fires, believing they could harness the power without undergoing the rigorous training of guardians. While such fires might burn brightly, they lacked the psychological and ritual mastery that gave the eternal flame its authority. Attempts to replicate its influence often failed spectacularly, producing public humiliation, political instability, or spiritual panic. These incidents reinforced the importance of guardianship, secrecy, and disciplined knowledge, demonstrating that fire alone was never enough. Authority depended on mastery, perception, and control. Conspirators often relied on secrecy, coded messages, and hidden networks to coordinate rebellion. The Guardians' expertise in perception and interpretation became a constant defensive challenge. Observing minute details in flame, shadow, and ritual gestures allowed them to detect subtle deviations or unusual behavior that hinted at plots. Guardians interpreted these anomalies as signals, tracing the web of conspiracy with patience and strategic foresight. Sometimes intervention was immediate, subtle, and invisible to the public. Other times, it involved prolonged observation and indirect manipulation to neutralize threats without revealing the mechanisms of flame authority. Whispers of rebellion also reveal the human dimension of flame authority: ambition, fear, and desire. Leaders tempted by the flame's secrets were often motivated by the same qualities that drove ordinary humans: greed, pride, curiosity, or resentment. Flame keepers understood that perception was fragile, and that even the most loyal subjects could be swayed by hope, fear, or perceived injustice. The eternal flame's authority was thus as much a product of human psychology as it was of ritual mastery. Every rebellion, conspiracy, or plot highlighted the delicate balance between control and chaos, belief and doubt. Some rebellions succeeded, but often at great cost. Attempted coups, misinterpreted omens, or poorly executed rituals could ignite social unrest, civil war, or the collapse of political alliances. In many cases, conspirators underestimated the Guardian's subtlety, falling victim to misdirection, miscommunication, or the psychological authority the flame inspired. Victories were rare, yet their occurrence reinforced the stakes of mastery. The eternal flame demanded vigilance, strategic insight, and relentless observation to maintain its dominion over rulers, populations, and the perception of divine authority. Interestingly, rebellion sometimes led to innovation in flame rituals. Guardians learned from challenges, refining ceremonies, strengthening security, and developing new methods to manipulate perception. Each conspiracy, whether successful or thwarted, became a lesson in the vulnerabilities of belief, the fragility of authority, and the psychological dynamics of obedience. In this way, threats did not merely challenge the eternal flame. They also contributed to its evolution, ensuring that rituals, symbols, and guardianship practices became increasingly sophisticated over time. Conspiracies also highlight the flame's role as a mirror of society. The nature of rebellion reflected prevailing fears, grievances, and desires among rulers and citizens alike. Where the flame was unquestioned, dissent simmered quietly, often unnoticed until it erupted. Where belief was tenuous or rituals mismanaged, rebellion flourished. By observing patterns of dissent, guardians could adapt their practices, reinforce faith, and ensure the psychological impact of the eternal flame remained powerful and consistent. The interplay of conspiracy and guardianship thus shaped not only politics but also culture, belief, and social cohesion. Ultimately, whispers of rebellion and conspiracy underscore the complexity and fragility of the eternal flame's influence. Its authority depended on meticulous management, strategic foresight, and an intimate understanding of human nature. Guardians maintained power not through force alone, but through subtle manipulation, careful observation, and the orchestration of perception. Rebellion was both a threat and a catalyst, reminding us that even the most revered symbols of authority are entwined with human ambition, fear, and desire. The eternal flame survived, evolved, and endured because it was protected by minds capable of seeing the unseen, anticipating the unknown, and guiding destiny from the shadows. Through these hidden conflicts, the eternal flame demonstrates that power is rarely absolute. It is fragile, contingent, and constantly contested. Its guardians, aware of the delicate equilibrium between control and chaos, operated with a combination of discipline, insight, and subtlety that preserved the flame's authority across centuries and continents. Every whisper of rebellion, every secret plot, and every attempt to challenge its dominion became part of the broader narrative of human interaction with fire, belief, and the unseen forces that shape history. The flame, in the midst of conspiracy, remained eternal, not simply because of its physical fire, but because of the guardian's mastery, the ritual's sophistication, and the psychological weight it carried. Rebellion, intrigue, and ambition were inevitable, yet the flame's influence endured, a testament to the subtle, enduring power of secrecy, perception, and disciplined knowledge. In this delicate balance of shadow and fire, human history was continuously molded, reminding us that the most potent forces often operate quietly, invisibly, and with profound impact. Throughout centuries, the eternal flame did not merely illuminate temples or palaces. It ignited stories, myths, and legends that burned into the collective memory of civilizations. These narratives, passed down through oral tradition, sacred texts, and clandestine chronicles, transformed the flame from a physical phenomenon into a symbol of timeless power, mystery, and destiny. Kings, priests, and commoners alike contributed to its mythology, embellishing events, interpreting omens, and attributing miraculous interventions to the fire. The flame became more than fire. It became a living memory, an enduring thread connecting human experience across generations. Legends often emphasize the supernatural qualities of the flame, portraying it as sentient, omniscient, and capable of judgment. Stories described flames that never extinguished, smoke that whispered warnings, and sparks that guided or punished the faithful. Children grew up hearing tales of kings saved by divine fire, priests who communicated with gods through sacred flames, and rebels undone by the very fire they sought to control. These narratives, though fantastical, served practical purposes. They reinforced obedience, inspired awe, and cultivated belief in a force beyond human understanding. In every tale, the eternal flame became both a moral teacher and an instrument of societal cohesion. Interestingly, legends were not uniform. They adapted to cultural context, geography, and political need. In Mesopotamia, tales emphasized divine judgment and royal legitimacy, framing the flame as a guardian of kingship and cosmic order. Across the Mediterranean, stories highlighted the flame's role in warfare, strategy, and the protection of sacred cities. In Asia, legends often focused on enlightenment, spiritual guidance, and the harmony between humans and nature, portraying the flame as a mediator between the mortal and the divine. Across continents, the common theme remained. The eternal flame was a source of authority, inspiration, and unseen influence. Myth-making around the flame was also a tool of political power. Rulers and priests consciously cultivated stories to enhance legitimacy, strengthen alliances, and suppress dissent. Miraculous accounts of flame interventions were disseminated to shape perception, ensure loyalty, and instill fear or admiration. A king who appeared favored by the eternal flame commanded respect. A city perceived as under its protection gained prestige and stability. Legends, carefully maintained and shared, amplified the psychological authority of the flame, creating a cultural echo that reinforced its influence far beyond the physical boundaries of temples or sacred fires. The narrative power of the flame extended to art, architecture, and ritual. Sculptures, murals, and reliefs depicted sacred flames with intricate symbolism, embedding the legends into the material culture of civilizations. Temples were constructed to align with celestial events, casting shadows and reflections that dramatized the stories told in myths. Music, chants, and poetry incorporated flame symbolism, translating visual and spatial experiences into auditory and emotional impact. Every cultural artifact became a vessel for legend, reinforcing the perception of the eternal flame as both physical and transcendent, a force woven into the identity of communities and empires. Oral transmission played a crucial role in maintaining legends. Traveling merchants, pilgrims, and emissaries carried stories along trade routes, spreading myths across continents. Tales evolved in subtle ways with each retelling, incorporating local beliefs, moral lessons, or political narratives, yet retaining the essential aura of mystery and authority. Over time, these stories transcended their origins, creating a shared human fascination with fire, power, and the unknown. The flame's memory, encoded in legend, became as influential as its physical presence, guiding behavior, shaping belief, and inspiring reverence across generations and borders. Legends also encoded practical wisdom. Behind allegory and symbolism lay knowledge about governance, psychology, and strategy. Tales of divine intervention often contained lessons about timing, loyalty, observation, and human behavior. Priests and guardians used these stories to educate initiates subtly, embedding instructions for ritual, interpretation, and decision-making within seemingly fantastical narratives. The flame's legends thus served a dual purpose. They inspired awe while preserving knowledge, allowing secret wisdom to endure while remaining accessible only to those trained to perceive its deeper meaning. Repetition, embellishment, and selective preservation were key to the endurance of flame legends. Events were amplified, miracles exaggerated, and morally significant actions highlighted, creating a layered mythology that reinforced the eternal flame's perceived omnipotence. Communities internalized these stories as truth, shaping social norms, ethical behavior, and expectations of authority. The flame became both a mirror and a mold of culture, reflecting shared values while subtly guiding actions, decisions, and belief. In this way, legends themselves were instruments of influence, extending the flame's authority beyond the temporal and spatial limitations of its physical presence. Interestingly, the legends were not static. They evolved with time, responding to societal change, political upheaval, and cultural contact. New heroes emerged, old villains were reinterpreted, and previously obscure rituals gained prominence. These shifts ensured that the eternal flame remained relevant, its memory continually refreshed and adapted to the context of successive generations. Through this dynamic storytelling, the flame maintained its psychological and cultural authority, demonstrating that power is not only in fire, but also in the stories we tell about it. The enduring impact of flame legends is evident in the way societies remember their past. Historical records, literature, and folklore often intertwine, creating narratives that are both instructive and mysterious. Even when physical traces of flame rituals disappeared, their stories persisted, shaping moral imagination, political thought, and cultural identity. Legends kept the flame alive in memory, ensuring that the lessons, awe, and psychological authority it represented continued to influence human behavior long after the fire itself was gone. Ultimately, the legends burned into memory illustrate the extraordinary ability of humans to transform physical phenomena into symbols of power, wisdom, and mystery. The eternal flame was never simply fire. It was a living narrative, a repository of authority, and a vessel for knowledge, observation, and influence. Through myth, storytelling, and cultural transmission, the flame's impact extended far beyond its physical boundaries, shaping civilizations, inspiring reverence, and ensuring that its memory endured across continents and generations. In every whispered tale, every artistic depiction, and every ritual retelling, the eternal flame lived on, immortal not only in fire but in the imagination and memory of humanity. The eternal flame was more than a symbol of spiritual authority. In the hands of kings, it became a tangible instrument of power. Monarchs who claimed access to its light and secrets were not merely rulers. They were perceived as divinely sanctioned, imbued with insight and judgment that transcended ordinary human understanding. To touch the flame, to witness its rituals, or to consult its guardians was to enter a domain where mortal ambition intersected with sacred influence. The fire conferred prestige, but it also demanded vigilance, discipline, and respect, for misusing its authority could bring swift and devastating consequences. Kings and queens approached the flame with a mixture of reverence, fear, and strategic calculation. The flame's presence in a palace or temple reinforced their legitimacy, creating the perception that their rule was sanctioned by forces beyond the ordinary. Ceremonies were carefully choreographed. Offerings, gestures, and proximity to fire were measured to convey loyalty, humility, and alignment with divine will. Every visual cue, from the placement of the monarch to the angle of their shadow in the flame's light, reinforced authority in a subtle yet profound way. Observers interpreted these signs as evidence of a ruler's virtue, wisdom, and right to govern. The interaction between king and flame was never casual. Monarchs were trained, instructed, and observed during ceremonies, ensuring they respected the discipline and subtlety required to maintain both perception and influence. Missteps were dangerous. An unguarded gesture, a misaligned position, or a display of impatience could diminish the flame's authority or undermine the perception of divine favor. In many courts, advisors and guardians monitored every detail, guiding rulers to act in accordance with both ritual and political necessity. The flame became an instrument of education as well as a symbol of power, teaching kings to balance ambition, prudence, and reverence. Through access to the eternal flame, rulers gained more than legitimacy. They acquired insight. Flamekeepers and guardians shared knowledge selectively, offering advice, interpreting omens, and subtly guiding decision-making. Kings who listened carefully could anticipate political unrest, respond to natural disasters, or manipulate rivals with precision. The flame's wisdom, interpreted through human skill, allowed rulers to act in ways that appeared inspired or divinely guided, enhancing their influence over subjects, allies, and enemies alike. History records instances in which monarchs credited miraculous foresight to divine favor, when in fact it reflected the meticulous observation and psychological mastery of the flame's guardians. The psychological impact on subjects was immense. Citizens, soldiers, and nobles who witnessed their king in communion with the flame often interpreted these interactions as evidence of supernatural authority. Loyalty was reinforced, obedience cultivated, and rebellion deterred, all through the subtle interplay of perception, ritual, and symbolism. The flame, when in the hands of kings, functioned as both a tool of governance and a psychological instrument, extending the ruler's influence far beyond the reach of armies or edicts. Its authority became woven into the very fabric of social and political life. Yet, the relationship between king and flame was inherently precarious. Monarchs were tempted to exploit its authority for personal gain, ambition, or conquest. Some attempted to monopolize knowledge, misinterpret omens, or override guardian instruction. These actions often had unintended consequences: poorly timed campaigns, internal unrest, or the loss of legitimacy. The eternal flame, though powerful, demanded collaboration, respect, and discipline. It required rulers to act in concert with guardians, observing rituals and codes of secrecy to preserve both perception and authority. When kings failed to honor this balance, disaster often followed, reinforcing the flame's dual role as benefactor and arbiter. The ceremonial use of the flame also reinforced hierarchy and societal order. Proximity to fire, participation in rituals, and access to sacred knowledge distinguished rulers and elites from the common populace. These distinctions were visually and psychologically reinforced, creating a stratified system where authority, obedience, and reverence were intertwined. The flame became a symbol not only of divine power, but also of social control, shaping perceptions and behavior in ways both subtle and profound. Its influence extended from the highest chambers of power to the streets, marketplaces, and villages, creating an invisible web of obedience and awe. Kings sometimes used the flame to consolidate power during crises. Historical accounts suggest that during invasions, rebellions, or political instability, rulers would perform elaborate flame ceremonies, invoking divine favor to rally armies and reassure subjects. Even in moments of uncertainty, the flame served as a stabilizing presence, reinforcing belief in the ruler's wisdom and legitimacy. Through these acts, fire and ritual transcended spectacle, becoming instruments of political strategy, social cohesion, and psychological manipulation. The eternal flame, in these contexts, was both sacred and pragmatic, merging spiritual symbolism with tangible authority. Yet, The flame's influence was not limited to individual rulers. It shaped dynasties. Families with consistent access to the flame, trained in its rituals and guided by its guardians, accumulated prestige, knowledge, and authority across generations. The flame's memory, myths, and symbolic weight became embedded in lineage, reinforcing the perception of divine sanction. Conversely, dynasties that neglected or mismanaged their relationship with the flame often faltered, their legitimacy questioned, and their power undermined. In this way, the flame acted as a force of continuity and consequence, shaping political history with a subtle yet undeniable hand. Interestingly, the flame's influence extended beyond politics into diplomacy. Monarchs and emissaries used flame rituals to negotiate alliances, resolve disputes, and demonstrate moral and spiritual authority. The presence of fire, interpreted as divine witness, lent weight to agreements and reinforced trust or intimidation, depending on the circumstance. Diplomats were trained to read flame symbolism, gestures, and ceremonial timing, translating ritual into actionable understanding of political intent. In this way, the eternal flame became a medium of communication, shaping relationships and outcomes far beyond the immediate temple or palace. Ultimately, the flame in the hands of kings illustrates the delicate interplay of power, perception, and ritual. It was not merely a tool of spectacle or devotion. It was a force that shaped decision-making, reinforced legitimacy, and influenced behavior across entire civilizations. Monarchs who respected, understood, and collaborated with the flame and its guardians flourished, while those who misjudged its authority often fell. The eternal fire demanded reverence, discipline, and subtlety, rewarding wisdom and punishing arrogance with equal intensity. Its presence ensured that authority was experienced as both tangible and transcendent, a power that extended beyond mortal control while remaining inextricably intertwined with human ambition. Through these centuries of kings and dynasties, the eternal flame remained a constant, a witness to history and an arbiter of influence. Its light shaped empires, guided decisions, and inspired awe across generations. The fire's significance transcended political power, embedding itself into culture, memory, and legend. In the hands of kings, the eternal flame demonstrated that authority, knowledge, and perception are inseparable, and that even the most brilliant rulers are, ultimately, dependent on forces they cannot fully command, forces as old, enduring, and mysterious as the fire itself. The eternal flame left its mark not only in memory and legend, but also in the very stones and ashes of the civilizations it touched. Temples, altars, and sacred monuments were meticulously crafted to preserve the flame's authority and communicate its power across generations. Symbols etched into stone, reliefs carved into temple walls, and the careful layering of ash from ritual fires created a permanent archive of knowledge, authority, and mystique. These tangible remnants were more than decoration. They were repositories of coded instruction, psychological influence, and spiritual significance, designed to endure long after the physical flame flickered. Guardians of the flame understood that stone and ash could serve as instruments of perception and control. Sacred spaces were constructed with geometric precision, aligned with celestial events, and designed to manipulate light and shadow. Engravings depicted not only mythic narratives, but also subtle cues for ritual practice and interpretation. Even the placement of ash from previous ceremonies held meaning, encoding messages for initiates and preserving the memory of divine interaction. To an untrained eye, These features appeared ornamental or ceremonial, but to the initiated, every detail conveyed authority, history, and instruction, reinforcing the eternal flame's influence even in its absence. Ash, in particular, held unique symbolic and practical significance. Collected from previous rituals, it was carefully stored, layered, and incorporated into new ceremonies, connecting past and present in a continuous chain of sacred practice. It became a medium of memory, preserving the energy, intention, and sanctity of previous flamekeepers' actions. Pilgrims, novices, and rulers who encountered these relics were subtly influenced, feeling the weight of centuries of devotion, discipline, and observation. Through stone and ash, the flame transcended the temporal limits of a single fire, embedding its presence into the physical and psychological landscape of human experience. Carvings and inscriptions often encoded the deepest secrets of flame mastery. Symbols, patterns, and sequences acted as guides for ritual precision, observation, and interpretation. They instructed the initiated on the movement of shadows, the timing of offerings, and the subtle nuances of ceremonial conduct. These secrets were deliberately hidden in plain sight, accessible only to those trained to perceive and understand their meaning. In this way, stone and ash became not merely memorials, but active instruments of continuity, ensuring that knowledge, authority, and influence endured across generations and geographic boundaries. Architecture, too, played a pivotal role in preserving flame authority. Temples, altars, and ceremonial chambers were designed to amplify psychological impact, using columns, arches, and recesses to manipulate light, shadow, and sound. Observers were guided through spatial experiences that reinforced awe, humility, and obedience. The interaction of fire with these structures created illusions of divine presence, movement, or responsiveness. Every architectural choice, from material selection to orientation, was calculated to maintain the perception of eternal power, extending the influence of the flame far beyond the simple act of lighting a fire. The durability of stone and ash also ensured that the flame's influence persisted through upheaval. Even as empires fell, cities were abandoned, or dynasties collapsed, these tangible markers carried forward the memory and authority of the eternal fire. Future generations, encountering ruins, relics, or ceremonial spaces, felt an echo of past power, a connection to knowledge and practice that had long since vanished from daily life. Stone and ash became a bridge between eras, preserving the psychological and cultural impact of the flame across time, reminding humanity of the enduring presence of sacred authority. Ash also served as a mnemonic device for guardians and initiates. Its color, texture, and placement recorded the outcomes of previous rituals, the passage of ceremonial cycles, and the alignment of spiritual and temporal events. By studying layers of ash, flamekeepers could anticipate seasonal changes, interpret omens, or refine ritual technique. This practice transformed material remnants into living tools of influence, blending observation, memory, and experience into a tangible archive of sacred knowledge. Stone inscriptions complemented this process, providing visual and symbolic references that reinforce continuity and precision in ceremonial practice. The creation of these markers required extraordinary foresight, skill, and discipline. Guardians knew that the flame's authority depended on both its presence and its memory. By embedding knowledge in stone and ash, they ensured that even if the fire were extinguished, the rituals, symbols, and psychological impact would survive. Temples were constructed with deliberate intention, carvings meticulously aligned with celestial events, and ashes carefully preserved to encode meaning. Every detail was calibrated to maintain influence, demonstrating that the flame's power was as much about continuity and perception as it was about the physical fire. These tangible secrets also reinforced hierarchy and social order. Access to inscriptions, altars, and ash layers was restricted, preserving knowledge for trained initiates and trusted guardians. Ordinary participants could experience awe and reverence, but only the initiated could decode and apply the information encoded in stone and ash. This selective access reinforced authority, obedience, and a perception of sacred power, creating a structured system in which the eternal flame's influence extended far beyond direct observation. Knowledge was layered, transmitted, and controlled, ensuring that the flame's legacy remained unbroken across centuries. Finally, secrets carved in stone and ash remind us that influence can endure silently, invisibly, and with profound impact. The eternal flame's authority did not rely solely on fire or spectacle. It depended on the careful preservation of memory, knowledge, and ritual precision. Stone and ash became vessels of continuity, bridging generations, encoding wisdom, and reinforcing belief. Through these physical remnants, the flame's legacy extended far beyond the immediate, creating a durable imprint on culture, perception, and history. Even in ruin, even when forgotten by daily life, the eternal flame persisted, a silent force shaping behavior, belief, and destiny through its carefully preserved material legacy. The influence of the eternal flame was not confined to a single kingdom, empire, or culture. Its power, rituals, and legends traveled across continents, carried by merchants, pilgrims, emissaries, and wandering sages. From the temples of Mesopotamia to the sacred altars of Asia, from Mediterranean palaces to remote mountain sanctuaries, the flame left an indelible mark on human civilization. Even societies that never directly interacted with a specific flame cult often absorbed elements of its practice, philosophy, or symbolism, a testament to the subtle yet pervasive reach of this extraordinary force. Trade routes became conduits for ritual knowledge and legend. As caravans traversed deserts, rivers, and mountains, they carried not only goods but also stories, symbols, and ritual objects associated with the eternal flame. Temples and shrines along these routes became nodes of influence, where travelers could observe ceremonies, witness flame rituals, or gain knowledge from guardians. Each encounter, however brief, contributed to the gradual diffusion of flame authority, embedding its symbolism into diverse cultures while preserving its mysterious aura. Observers often interpreted these practices through their own cultural lens, creating variations in myth and ritual that retained the core influence of the flame while adapting to local belief systems. Pilgrimage further amplified the flame's transcontinental impact. Devotees traveling to sacred sites participated in rituals, observed ceremonies, and carried stories back to their homelands. The experience was transformative. Pilgrims often returned with a sense of awe, obligation, and connection to a power that seemed simultaneously human and divine. They transmitted both physical practices and psychological influence, subtly reinforcing the authority of the flame even in regions far removed from its original temples. Over generations, this created a network of interconnected beliefs, rituals, and legends that transcended geography, weaving the flame into the spiritual and cultural fabric of multiple civilizations. The Guardians understood that continuity depended on adaptability. While the flame's rituals were carefully preserved, minor adjustments were made to accommodate local customs, climates, and social norms. These adaptations ensured that the flame remained accessible, compelling, and authoritative to new audiences without compromising the integrity of its power. Even as practices evolved across continents, the core principles, discipline, perception, psychological influence, and secrecy, remained intact. This delicate balance between preservation and adaptation allowed the eternal flame to transcend borders and endure through centuries of cultural transformation. The flame's legends also migrated alongside its rituals. Stories of miraculous fires, divine interventions, and sacred kings spread across lands, inspiring reverence, fear, and devotion. These legends were often incorporated into local mythology, enriching cultural narratives while preserving the essence of flame authority. As myths evolved, they maintained a common thread. The eternal flame was a force that shaped destiny, influenced rulers, and demanded obedience. Even when details shifted, the flame's psychological and spiritual authority remained unmistakable, linking disparate peoples through shared stories of fire, power, and mystery. Diplomacy and political exchange further amplified the flame's reach. Emissaries and envoys visiting distant courts carried not only diplomatic messages, but also ritual knowledge, sacred symbols, and interpretations of flame authority. These exchanges allowed rulers in far-flung regions to emulate, adapt, or adopt practices associated with the eternal flame, reinforcing its prestige and mystique. In some cases, monarchs leveraged this borrowed authority to consolidate power, enhance legitimacy, or intimidate rivals. The flame became both a symbol of divine favor and a tool of political strategy, extending its influence far beyond the immediate vicinity of sacred fires and temples. The diffusion of flame practices also created a subtle network of guardians across regions. Knowledge, ritual expertise, and symbolic language were shared selectively, ensuring that the essence of flame authority was preserved even in new cultural contexts. Guardians in distant lands maintained contact through emissaries, encoded messages, and ceremonial synchronization, forming an invisible web that spanned continents. This network allowed the eternal flame to maintain consistency, continuity, and influence across diverse societies, demonstrating that its power relied not solely on physical fire, but on disciplined guardianship, psychological insight, and the careful transmission of knowledge. Human perception and belief were central to this transcontinental authority. Across continents, people experienced awe, fear, and devotion when encountering the flame, whether through ritual, legend, or symbolic representation. These reactions reinforced social hierarchies, guided behavior, and cultivated loyalty, effectively extending the flame's influence without direct force. The Guardian's mastery of human psychology ensured that even distant observers internalized the authority of the eternal flame, creating a shared understanding of power, sacredness, and obedience that transcended borders and cultures. Remarkably, echoes of the flame persisted even in regions where physical traces of fire rituals vanished. Temples fell into ruin, dynasties collapsed, and civilizations disappeared, yet the stories, symbols, and psychological imprint of the flame endured. Later societies incorporated fragments of these traditions into their own practices, sometimes unknowingly, perpetuating the influence of a fire that had long ceased to burn. These echoes illustrate the extraordinary resilience of ideas, symbols, and rituals when anchored in human perception, devotion, and memory. The eternal flame was as much an enduring concept as a physical phenomenon, shaping human culture long after the original fire had dimmed. The flame's transcontinental legacy also highlights the interconnectedness of human civilizations. After centuries of fire, ritual, legend, and guardianship, the eternal flame remains as much a question as a symbol. Its light may no longer burn in many of the sacred spaces that once housed it, yet its presence continues to echo in memory, culture, and imagination. What was the true power of the flame? Was it divine, mystical, or simply the manifestation of human mastery, observation, and psychological insight? These questions linger, refusing simple answers, challenging us to consider the interplay between belief, authority, and perception that shaped civilizations for millennia. The legacy of the eternal flame is profound precisely because it operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it was a fire, tangible and mesmerizing, drawing worshippers, rulers, and pilgrims alike. Beneath that, it was a tool wielded by guardians to shape perception, guide decisions, and maintain authority. And beneath that still, it became myth, a symbol of continuity, destiny, and the enduring mysteries of human history. The flame's influence demonstrates that power is rarely one-dimensional. It is woven from material presence, psychological mastery, cultural symbolism, and a human desire to connect with something greater than oneself. Reflection on the flame forces us to confront our own understanding of history. How much of the past was shaped by events as they occurred, and how much by perception, ritual, and legend? Flame keepers carefully orchestrated belief, knowledge, and ritual to control outcomes. Yet to the outside observer, their influence appeared miraculous, inevitable, and often unquestionable. History, in this sense, becomes intertwined with perception. What people believed, feared, or revered could be as consequential as the physical events themselves. The eternal flame reminds us that power is as much about shaping minds as it is about wielding armies or decreeing laws. Even today, traces of the flame's influence can be found in myths, cultural rituals, and storytelling traditions. Modern societies still revere fire as sacred, transformative, and mysterious. Ceremonies, festivals, and symbolic acts echo patterns established by ancient flame guardians, suggesting a continuity that spans millennia. Though the original rituals may have faded, the psychological and cultural imprint remains, demonstrating the enduring reach of perception, story, and symbolic authority. The flame, in this sense, is eternal not because it burns forever, but because its influence continues to shape how we understand power, belief, and history itself. The ethical dimension of the eternal flame is equally compelling. Guardians and rulers alike face dilemmas that resonate with modern audiences. How to wield authority responsibly, how to balance secrecy and transparency, how to guide belief without crushing free will. The flame demanded wisdom as much as discipline. Those who failed, who misused its authority or underestimated its power, often met with calamity, reinforcing the notion that influence, especially psychological and symbolic influence, carries profound responsibility. Some rebellions succeeded, but often at great cost. Attempted coups, misinterpreted omens, or poorly executed rituals could ignite social unrest, civil war, or the collapse of political alliances. In many cases, conspirators underestimated the guardian's subtlety, falling victim to misdirection, miscommunication, or the psychological authority the flame inspired. Victories were rare, yet their occurrence reinforced the stakes of mastery. The eternal flame demanded vigilance, strategic insight, and relentless observation to maintain its dominion over rulers, populations, and the perception of divine authority. Interestingly, Rebellion sometimes led to innovation in flame rituals. Guardians learned from challenges, refining ceremonies, strengthening security, and developing new methods to manipulate perception. Each conspiracy, whether successful or thwarted, became a lesson in the vulnerabilities of belief, the fragility of authority, and the psychological dynamics of obedience. In this way, threats did not merely challenge the eternal flame. They also contributed to its evolution, ensuring that rituals, symbols, and guardianship practices became increasingly sophisticated over time. Conspiracies also highlight the flame's role as a mirror of society. The nature of rebellion reflected prevailing fears, grievances, and desires among rulers and citizens alike. Where the flame was unquestioned, dissent simmered quietly, often unnoticed until it erupted. Where belief was tenuous or rituals mismanaged, rebellion flourished. By observing patterns of dissent, guardians could adapt their practices, reinforce faith, and ensure the psychological impact of the eternal flame remained powerful and consistent. The interplay of conspiracy and guardianship thus shaped not only politics but also culture, belief, and social cohesion. Ultimately, whispers of rebellion and conspiracy underscore the complexity and fragility of the eternal flame's influence. Its authority depended on meticulous management, strategic foresight, and an intimate understanding of human nature. Guardians maintained power not through force alone, but through subtle manipulation, careful observation, and the orchestration of perception. Rebellion was both a threat and a catalyst, reminding us that even the most revered symbols of authority are entwined with human ambition, fear, and desire. The eternal flame survived, evolved, and endured because it was protected by minds capable of seeing the unseen, anticipating the unknown, and guiding destiny from the shadows. Through these hidden conflicts, the eternal flame demonstrates that power is rarely absolute. It is fragile, contingent, and constantly contested. Its guardians, aware of the delicate equilibrium between control and chaos, operated with a combination of discipline, insight, and subtlety that preserved the flame's authority across centuries and continents. Every whisper of rebellion, every secret plot, and every attempt to challenge its dominion became part of the broader narrative of human interaction with fire, belief, and the unseen forces that shape history. The flame, in the midst of conspiracy, remained eternal. Not simply because of its physical fire, but because of the guardian's mastery, the ritual's sophistication, and the psychological weight it carried. Rebellion, intrigue, and ambition were inevitable, yet the flame's influence endured, a testament to the subtle, enduring power of secrecy, perception, and disciplined knowledge. In this delicate balance of shadow and fire, human history was continuously molded, reminding us that the most potent forces often operate quietly, invisibly, and with profound impact.